Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome members and officers to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting and welcome everyone watching online via North Herts YouTube channel, North Herts Council YouTube channel. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Susan Ledane, to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending online.
Good evening. Can I confirm that the following officers are in attendance and can hear us and we can hear them? Martin Lawrence,
Good evening, present.
Chris Jeffrey,
Good evening, present.
Frank Harrison,
Good evening, present.
and Chloe Gray.
Good evening, present.
Thank you. Are there any other officers in attendance remotely? Okay. Rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. The normal procedure rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. Voting. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes and no abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? No? I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you. So item 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Louise Peace. Having given due notice, Councillor Sean Prendergast will substitute for Councillor Peace. Are there any other apologies? I can see that there aren't, so it's fine. We'll move on. Item 2, the minutes of the 3rd of September 2024. I propose that we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September 2024. Can I have a seconder, please?
Could I just make a comment because having read through the minutes and particularly pertaining to the Scrutiny Charter, I realised that I omitted to thank you for all of your work that you've been doing on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think it's a testament to your chairmanship that when we had our corporate peer challenge feedback, overview and scrutiny was something which was identified as an improvement. So thank you for all of your work.
Thank you. It's very kind to say, Councillor. Would you like to second the minutes as well?
Indeed, I will.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. We'll go to the vote then.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay. Item 3, notification of other business. No other business has been notified. Item 4, Chair's announcements. In accordance with Council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the Council's YouTube channel as well as the Council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, 4.8.23a of the Constitution does not apply to this meeting. Therefore, a member may leave the room during the debate in consideration of that item and be able to vote. However, please be mindful of the business on the agenda and wherever possible leave at an appropriate point in proceedings. Members are reminded that we have adopted the Scrutiny Charter, as Councillor Munster pointed out, which outlines how we conduct scrutiny at North Herts Council, including the principles of independence, initiative and integrity. It's important that all members are mindful of this and how they approach the items on the agenda tonight and at future meetings. Full details on the adopted charter can be found on the Council's intranet page. 5, public participation. We have no public participation at this meeting. 6, urgent and general exception items. There are no urgent or general exception items. 7, called in items. No items have been called in. 8, members' questions. No questions from members have been received. And we move to item 9, which is an information note, 3C's half year 24-25 update with Councillor Val Bryant to present.
Thank you, Chair. This information note is to provide an update on the half-year 24-25 performance regarding the comments, compliments and complaints, the 3Cs, for the Council and for the contractors that provide services on the Council's behalf. This briefing note accompanies the 3Cs dashboard at Appendix A and the breakdown of 3Cs by service and type at Appendix B. The main points of the breakdown is that the number of complaints and comments received directly by the council both increased compared to the same period in 23-24. The number of complaints received by both the council and our contractors has also increased, and a large portion of that has been attributed to the change of leisure contract, which is detailed in 3.10 on the information note. The percentage of stage 1 complaints resolved within 10 days has increased to 90%, with the target being 80%. It's worth noting that the percentage of interactions, collections, visitors resulting in a complaint remains below 1%. The buses saw a notable decrease of complaints, minus 81% received. The council and contractor received 80 compliments across a variety of service areas as seen in Appendix B. There were 16 stage 2 complaints across a range of service areas, but only 8 were deemed to be justified. The local government ombudsman received 3 complaints in this period. The details are provided on the information note. Out of the 3 complaints, 1 was not upheld nor investigated. 1 had just been assigned to an investigator, and the 3rd was upheld with fault and injustice as outlined in the information note. 3.19 outlines a complaint that was received outside the reporting period. However, it is being highlighted to everyone scrutiny this evening due to recommendations from the local government ombudsman. A report is being taken to Cabinet on the 19th of November by the environmental health manager. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Just to update, I've been informed it's going to be taken to the 26th of November this afternoon, but otherwise, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Have we got any questions? We'll go to Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the breakdown of the complaints data on page 29, and I can see we've had quite a substantial increase in the number of complaints about revenues, billing, and recovery. I was just wondering whether it would be possible to obtain an explanation either during this meeting or outside of the meeting circulated to committee members about the nature of those complaints and if they indicate any particular trend or issue in that area.
Thank you. You have a answer.
Chris, if you could answer that,
Sure.
please.
Yeah, no problem. I've got a breakdown of the complaints. It is a variety of reasons, but I'd be more than happy to share that list with you outside of the meeting. That's no problem.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Munzer.
Thank you. Could I just focus on the one LGO complaint that had its final report delivered on the 19th and resulted in the council paying £3,000 to a local resident. I think there's a concern that it is a wider issue surrounding enforcement of the council, not just pertaining to sort of environmental health and sort of, noise abatement, etc., but sort of planning enforcement. And I was just interested to know what lessons have been learnt from that, and is the council sort of now reviewing its enforcement procedure to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Because obviously, we don't want to be paying out £3,000 every time someone makes a complaint. We want it to be dealt with in a just and proportionate and efficient manner.
Absolutely. Councillor Bryan, do you want to refer that as well?
Thank you. I do know the outline details of this
Okay.
complaint and have spoken with officers about this. It is quite recent, so we're at the point whereby the lessons being learned is actually in the future. So if we may either respond to you in writing or come back to the next ONS meeting on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. In regards to the increase in the leisure contractor complaints, do we know how many were upheld? And if so, what those related to? Is there a theme of upheld complaints? Because it's quite an increase. And then my second question is with the LGSCO response to the noise complaint. One of the key issues I picked up from that in paragraph 52, 53 and 54 of the LGO report was there was some complaint handling issues in terms of compensation. So the resident requested redress and the council refused that redress, and it may have prevented the case actually going to the LGSCO. And I wonder if that's been highlighted as a training issue.
Questions there. The first question, the complaints tended to be around customers getting used to the new booking system, and the fact that there were split sessions in the day for the first time, so that customers had to decide whether to go in the morning or the afternoon, with a close at lunch times. We will have to wait to the next quarter's 3C to see if that has actually settled down. It certainly seems to have settled down. The second question, which I'm now trying to remember what it was, about the complaint. It was before my time in cabinet, so I would have to investigate that and get back to you outside the meeting.
Thank you. Just on the point about customers getting used to the new systems, is there any data on the trends within the 6 months? Is it going downwards now? Because you'd expect it to peak at the start and then come down. Is that what we've seen? Or
can I ask
yeah.
Chris if he's got that information, please?
Yeah, that's no problem. I spoke to the leisure manager this afternoon ahead of tonight's ONS. She mentioned that obviously the changes are still ongoing and customers are still getting used to those changes, and there's still changes to come, such as the refurbishments, etc. So they haven't seen a decline yet. Obviously, they are hoping to see a decline once the contract has bedded in and customers are used to those changes, but we don't have that data as it stands yet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Claydon.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the bar graph on page 27 of the papers, you see quite a large increase in comments year over year and a fairly large decrease in compliments. I'm just wondering whether it's always entirely clear what category everything should belong to, or whether sometimes compliments may be effectively reported as comments, and therefore, there is some exchange potentially between those bars. And if not, are comments always treated as neutral, or are they sort of considered for their valence as whether they're positive or negative?
I think that it's clear when a resident has made a complaint, and it's clear when they've made a compliment. And the parameters for comments between those, I'm not sure of. So I'll ask Chris, who's at the chalk face on this one, to see if you can shine light on it.
That's fine. The three C's that come through the council, they are directed through the customer service centre. So my team receive those 3 C's, they check that it is a comment, compliment or complaint, and they will log it as such. And obviously they have training to identify which one of those it falls into. So we can be fairly certain that they are accurate. But when it comes to the contractor logging their own 3 C's, that's where there could be some ambiguity there. Councillor Dennis raised a query at the last ONS around the comments and whether they could fall into a kind of a positive, neutral, or negative categorization. I did run that on this occasion. I do have a little bit of data here, if I can just grab my notes. So obviously this is subjective because it's my opinion, but I felt that 3 of those comments fell into a positive category, so that was 8%. There was one that was kind of neutral and positive, so that was 3%. Neutral was 9 to 26%, and then negative was 22. So that's the largest proportion at 63%. So again, that's subjective, but I do have that kind of data that I can now start to build up and gather a picture on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright Mason.
Yeah, so back on the everyone active complaints, obviously we don't know, as you said, where the levels of complaints would go, but if they continue to rise or stay the same, do we know what we'll do? Is there any sort of like performance penalties in the contract, anything like that?
I don't know about the performance penalties, but I do know that Councillor Debenham has been working with the company right from the beginning. Of course, the first couple of weeks were the worst, and has been talking to them and so that some of the complaints were ironed out. So I can ask him for an update if you like.
Councillor Manser.
Thank you. Just to follow on from Councillor Wright Mason, focusing on paragraph 3.6. Obviously, this is a new contract. We're working with a new leisure provider, Everyone Active. Do you know whether Everyone Active has a different complaints policy? If they do, then sort of what are the key differences between their complaints policy and our policy? And what work has been done to ensure that Everyone Active are aware of our standards to ensure that complaints are resolved within 10 to 20 days?
I may be proved wrong by Chris, but I was assuming that we had one complaints policy it's agreed as part of the contract with Anywhere Active. Chris, could you clarify, please?
I'm afraid I will have to check with the leisure manager, but I'd be more than happy to do that and come back to the committee afterwards.
To us.
Councillor Tyson.
Thank you. Yeah, Val, just on a slightly more upbeat note, I was looking at the waste and recycling figures there. Do we happen to have any detail on why it was that Abasa had such a large drop in the number of complaints?
Again, I'd have to ask the cabinet member for waste, Amy Allen. But I think a lot of work has been put into Royston recently, particularly with the recycling of the soft plastics. There's been lots of comments about that in Royston.
Okay, I can't see any further questions. Given that this was an information note, there's no vote required. So thank you, Councillor Bryant and Chris online. We'll move on to the next item, which is item 10, the supported housing scheme for women, with Councillor Dave Winstanley to present.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, everyone. So this is a proposal that will go to Cabinet on the 26th of November. It's for the allocation of £73,000 towards a supported housing scheme for women, the aim of which is to help address the growing demand for homelessness support in North Hertfordshire, particularly among women. The initiative is in response to the ongoing challenges faced by single homeless women, many of whom have complex support needs, including experiences of domestic abuse, mental health challenges and substance misuse. The scheme is in partnership with Herts County Council and will be run by DrugLink. DrugLink are a Herts-based charity. They provide education on substances and substance misuse and recovery support and housing services, which support clients on their journey. They help people develop skills and gain confidence to follow a path of reintegration back into the community. This particular scheme is a 2-year pilot, but DrugLink do have experience offering a variety of different services in their supported housing schemes. As mentioned, the proposal is to contribute £73,000 towards the scheme, which is match funding and commitment made by Herts County Council. That money is from ring-fenced MHCLG homelessness prevention grant, and it was previously approved by Cabinet in December 22 to go towards a similar scheme, but that scheme unfortunately fell through. This proposal aligns with our priority of accessible services and is a step forward in ensuring we can offer tailored safe spaces for women in need, empowering them towards independence. This initiative will not only help meet a critical local need, but also supports North Herts Council's commitment to tackling domestic violence, as demonstrated by our recent White Ribbon accreditation. Just while I'm on that, White Ribbon Day is on the 25th of November, which is the day before the the cabinet meeting that this one will come forward at. If you've got any questions, I'll attempt to answer them, but if not, I've got Martin Lawrence on the line for any technical backup. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Munster.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got three key questions at the moment. Would you be able to tell us, Councillor Winstanley, how many women this is going to benefit over the 2 years?
I can't tell you how many it will actually benefit. The plan is it's for a 6-bed unit. Now, obviously, it depends on the sort of move on rate of that particular unit. So I don't know if Martin's got any particular forecasting on that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Winstanley. It's difficult to answer, to be honest, Councillor Munster. Stays can be 18 months, 2 years for an individual person, so potentially the full life of the pilot. Equally, some people may move on quicker for one reason or another, so it's difficult to estimate. It's not going to be the biggest service because there's only 6 beds anyway when it's at full capacity. So I'm afraid I can't give any more detail on that. Perhaps we could come back if that's okay, just to give you an update, sort of 18 months in or something, if that would help.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. My next question just is focusing on sort of the work of which has been done with other stakeholders, because obviously we've been working closely with Drugs Link and Hertfordshire County Council, but has there been any additional working with, the Prison and Probation Service, the police, for example, on this?
Not that I'm aware on this particular scheme, no.
And just my final question. Obviously, this is a pilot for 2 years as a result of the funding from the central government pot homelessness prevention grant. Have we been, obviously, we want to make sure that it is working as it should and it's delivering the desired outcomes. Have we any idea about the potential costs after the pilot if we are going to continue this scheme?
Yeah, I think I'll have to defer to Martin again on that one.
Thank you, Councillor Winstanley. We'd anticipate, Councillor Munster, to be fairly similar to how they are now. That there is, if the model remains the same, the staff coverage will be similar, and therefore the cost should be fairly kind of like comparable. The question over the council's revenue position is challenging, as everyone knows. This is ring-fence homeless prevention grant, as Councillor Winstanley said. We have received it each year for the last 20 years. So if we are requested to fund it, there might be an opportunity through that pot going forward. There's also, the government are looking at a supported housing regulatory review, which might affect how these schemes are funded, because a lot of it comes through housing benefit. So there might be some developments in that over the 18 months, 2 years as well, really. So I have to say these schemes aren't cheap because they do involve a lot of staff resource. 73,000 for this pilot is not the highest that I've seen. So hopefully it's successful, and hopefully we've got some opportunities to fund it if it's required beyond the 2 years. Thanks.
Councillor Wright.
I noticed that paragraph 7.4 says that the proposed pilot is designed to help women with a variety of support needs, which is likely to include women who are survivors of domestic abuse. I would argue that women in that latter category should be the first priority, as it's these women who most need the security of a female-only space. So I just wonder, is there a way to ensure that these women are first in the queue for spaces?
I think we'd have to check that with DrugLink, I think, because they are the ones running the scheme. I know we're contributing to it, but that is a service that is part of the service offering that they do provide. But yeah, I need to speak to Martin and the team and relay that with DrugLink.
Thank you. Councillor Claydon.
Just similarly on in terms of prioritization, I was just wondering, does the involvement of DrugLink imply that there will be a focus or a preference for cases where drugs are a factor?
Again, I think that is one of the main services that they provide. Again, I don't know if Martin's got any more information on this, but
yeah, so it's a much broader spectrum of services, as was mentioned earlier by Councillor Winstanley. So there'll be kind of like support for people with poor mental health. There might be some offending behaviours, domestic abuse. So the fact they're branded DrugLink, the service is much broader than that. It's not purely people with those needs. And in terms of prioritisation for survivors of domestic abuse, there'll certainly be one of the key cohorts. The good news, I guess, if there is any, is that there are many other services for that client group who perhaps don't need this sort of support. And we work very closely with survivors against domestic abuse, for example. There's other Herts County Council Commission services for domestic abuse survivors. So there are some other options there, but absolutely domestic abuse survivors will be one of the key priority groups.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
So there's the pilot. So what are the success criteria for the pilot, and when and how do we make the decision that we're going to carry it on or not carry it on?
yeah, I think this will come. It will come. Obviously, move on rate will be one factor. Improvements in the numbers of those having the support need will be another factor. Martin, any others?
Yeah, so this DrugLink have actually been commissioned by Herts County, and this council's contribution will go to supporting Herts County's investment as well, 50-50 stake, if you like, to make it work. So Herts County have a service specification. I'm actually looking at it now. It's 61 pages, and there are performance requirements in there to ascertain if this is successful or not. It's in a Herts County owned building, so that's an asset that this particular Herts County team will need to justify the use of for this project. So we will monitor it very closely. And as I mentioned earlier, if the committee would like a revisit once the scheme is up and running and we're well into it, we're very happy to report performance at that time as well.
Thank you. Councillor Bartos.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really glad to see this scheme and just want to thank everyone that has worked on it. Obviously, we know there's so many reasons why people become homeless, and as the report says, people will be presenting with different and complex needs. So my question is, if this scheme is going to be supporting people who do and people who don't have substance related issues, what safeguards will be put in place to kind of ensure that additional needs don't develop as a result of kind of co-living in that space?
Yeah, I mean, DrugLink are a experienced charity that run a number of sites in other areas. They're Herts based, but they have other areas. You've got one in St Albans, one in Hatfield. So that this is not, although this is a pilot here, this is not their first scheme. So they do have experience of dealing with these issues.
Thank you. Councillor Wright Mason.
Yeah, I just wondered if we'd given much thought to the sort of comms strategy around it. I think it's an absolutely fantastic scheme, but unfortunately we've seen a small amount of quite vocal public backlash with similar schemes. It felt like maybe we were doing a bit of catch up with the comms. So I just wondered if sort of we'd had a proactive think about that?
I know at this stage we're not disclosing the actual location, obviously because of sensitivities with the you know who the residents may be. But yeah, I don't know if Martin's got any more information on the actual comms side.
No, I think it's very much the service is very much welcomed. I think Herts County are very proud of it. I think Councillor Prendergast actually in the chamber today has asked that the ward councillors be alerted to the presence of this scheme in their ward, just for just out of courtesy, really. In terms of publicising it, I've actually received a pamphlet, a brochure, if you like, today, produced by DrugLink. So should it all go through towards the end of the month, we can certainly talk to comms about some messaging around its presence now. If you know if that's what's being requested, it is good news. It is a small scheme though, and there are other schemes within the district, but we could perhaps do it as a wider article leading into winter, maybe with people having housing challenges as bad weather comes in. So very happy to look at that if that's what the committee would like.
Thank you. Councillor Manser.
Obviously, it would be inappropriate to disclose the location because of the nature of the situations that a number of these women will have gone through. Could you confirm, though, that the police have been informed of this for obviously a whole host of reasons, but mainly, obviously, if a former partner, for example, does manage to locate them, then they're able to have an immediate response and obviously deal with that situation before any harm comes towards any of the residents?
I'm not aware that they have been notified at this stage, but don't know if Martin can confirm.
Yeah, so in 2 weeks' time, should the scheme get the green light, it could potentially be up and running January, February time. So we'll ensure the police are in the loop, and they may well put a marker on the property or whatever they do to prioritise responses to it. But it's a bit chicken and egg, really, until we know it's actually going to go ahead. We'll sort of involve the relevant parties when we've got a bit more certainty, really.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? No. Okay, in that case, we'll move to the recommendation, which is that Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommend to Cabinet that the Cabinet supports the allocation of £73,000 of ring-fenced MHCLG homelessness prevention grant to HCC to match fund the 2-year pilot of DrugLink's supported housing scheme for women. Happy to propose that. Can I have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Tyson.
Yeah,
thank
I'll
you.
take a second.
Okay, and is there any debate? Okay, so there's no debate, so we'll move to the vote then, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move to item 11, the Enterprise Directorate update with Councillor Tamsin Thomas to present.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to members of the committee for this opportunity to provide an update on the progress of the Enterprise Directorate. I'm particularly appreciative to officers in preparing the report today and for joining us, and also to those joining us in person. It is appreciated, so thank you. So the council plan is the key document that sets out the objectives of the council for each portfolio, including the enterprise department, which obviously plays a key role in the delivery of this. The current plan includes the sort of following project and service deliveries, including the Churchgate regeneration project and the wider economic development and tourism strategy for the district, the museum service and town hall, with Berrymead Museum being one of the larger, more significant projects in that portfolio, which we'll come on to later in the meeting, as well as the estates programme, which includes the generation of capital receipts through land dispersal and revenue generation through council assets. The team is also responsible for managing a number of our key external relationships, including with organisations like the BID and the Market Traders Association, etc. So I want to say it's been a real privilege since coming into my role in May to work with officers on this portfolio, and I do look forward to members' questions and comments. Before we go to that, I want to check, Steve, if there was anything you wanted to add to the initial opening.
Just a little bit, nothing significant, but more just to make sure people are aware. As you know, we were sent a number of questions, which we've done our best to answer them. Just wanted to draw attention to section 8, specifically with regards to the team, which is set out in 8.3.3. As you can see, we're not a large team. And if you then look back and you go up to the finances and you see the finances that we are generating, both revenue and also capital receipts, that is quite a significant amount of money which comes into the council. And also if you go to Appendix A, that provides what I would say the top level program that we're working to. And also in that each service manager has a more detailed program. So for example, if I was to look at the estates program, which you don't have in front of you, but there's probably another 40 plus tasks that they're working on. So this is very top level that we're looking at the moment. And I think it's a credit to the team when, as I said, if you look at the numbers that we have within the department, it's not a huge team, but we are covering significant ground, and therefore there are sometimes reasons for why things do slip a little bit. But I will leave it obviously to the committee to ask any specific questions, and we've got the team with us to also assist.
Thank you very much. I forgot to thank Martin online, so thank you, Martin, for your contribution previously, if you're still there. Yeah, thanks for coming this evening and for the efforts put into this. This is obviously part of the new renewed initiative to take a more strategic, proactive approach to scrutiny. So hopefully it's welcomed by members. I certainly think it's an informative report. And have we got any questions? Councillor Munster?
Thank you, Chair. And as you allude to, this is very much looking and having a deep dive into the directorate, sort of looking at what's going well, looking at, areas perhaps that we need to improve. I just want to focus on finance, first of all, because it's a very, very comprehensive report, number of questions surrounding it. At the moment, according to the table on 8.3, specifically the museum and the town hall, we are making a over £400,000 loss. Now, can you tell us what savings have been identified in order to try and keep that loss to a minimum, or even turn a profit?
I'm not sure how many museums are profit-making enterprises, particularly at the municipal level. So I think I really want to focus on a couple of things there. First, that there is a significant amount of income that the museum is generating of the budget, which I think for a cultural service in the current climate is to be recognised, but also to highlight, and I know we'll come on to this later as well, the sort of very important role of the museum's accreditation in terms of the success of the team for securing grants to cover a lot of the core curatorial work and types of different projects that the team does there. In terms of project savings, cost savings, I will turn to Rob if I can.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. So I guess I'd, with your permission, divide this up into the museum and the town hall. So from the town hall perspective, we've done a lot of work over the recent years. We've introduced a new website for the venue. We've introduced 2 new bars for the venue to really increase the bar revenue, and we monitor that very closely to ensure it's profitable. We also have launched our own internal events, so the venue now provides a lot of in-house events rather than just simply being a venue for hire, and we've seen great returns that way, which we do monitor on an ongoing basis. We've also in recent weeks introduced a new booking system, which will allow us to do much more of a deep dive into the statistics around the hire inquiries that we're getting, which events are most profitable, all kinds of things like that. But we do also try to make sure that the venue is not only used as a commercial venue. We have a number of fitness classes which are well attended throughout the week, and we are trying to increase, as I think it says in the report, the saturation of the hireable periods as much as possible. This includes looking at other spaces that might not be so obvious. So everyone imagines the main hall. We have the Mountford Hall at Hitchin Town Hall, but we also have our terrace gallery and our Lucas room and some lesser or less visible spaces that we're really trying to push. If I could then turn to the museum, I think Councillor Thomas is right to say that museums typically by their nature are not the most profitable ventures, and obviously the benefits are mainly social around what's delivered. But that said, we are trying to run it as commercially as we can. We've reworked our education service recently to ensure that we are matching as much as possible the local curriculum, or rather the national curriculum, I should say. We work with the local schools to try and make sure that we loan objects from our collection out to those schools. We've also increased in recent years the number of curatorial talks that we offer, and also the diversity of the subject matters that we cover. Those are typically very well attended, mainly selling out. I'd be happy to provide more statistics on that if the committee wished. And finally, the other aspect of this is trying to increase the number of school holiday, academic holiday workshops and things like that we do in our learning centre. So it's about trying to make sure we've got full saturation, or as close to it as we can, of the available services that we provide.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on 8.5.8, the Hitchin Town Hall, the saturation. Is that getting more saturated? What sort of levels are you looking at the moment?
So one of the reasons that we've moved over to a new booking system is because of the lack of visibility around that. So this new system will allow us to do a much more comprehensive analysis of that, and also look at the bookings that we've missed, for what reasons that might be. Look at bookings that have simply been turned away because there's already a hire taking place in that slot. So there's various things that we can do. Anecdotally, we've also seen an increase. Our team is certainly busier. We have more events taking place. I'd be happy to provide the statistics exactly on that, following up if you need.
Thanks. And just following up also on Councillor Munson's first point, the deficit, as it were. I appreciate these ventures don't often turn a profit, but is that trending? We've obviously got this year's budget figures. Is that trending upwards or downwards in terms of the size of that? Do you know?
I'd be reluctant to go on the record because I don't have that answer to hand, but I can certainly follow up.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Tyson. Oh, sorry. Tamsin, did you want to come in?
Just wanted to ask, would it actually be helpful if we tried to separate those figures out so there's a bit more clarity around the town hall, which has a more commercial footing, from the museum service? Would that be helpful?
I think so.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't do it now, but yeah, in the future. Okay, Councillor Tyson.
That was my question. Could you separate it out?
Okay, well, you've answered that. Councillor Munson.
Sorry. So it sounds like an awful lot of what's being done is sort of quite new and quite recent, and perhaps it was somewhat optimistic of one to assume or try and get us to turn a profit. However, what was the position last financial year? Is it better or worse than the figure that's before us for the proposed budget for this financial year, if you don't want to go into any detail?
So I can certainly tell you that last year the revenue was superior to the year prior. What I don't have to hand and what I'd have to come back to you over is what the net position of that was. But I know that we are certainly becoming busier. We're earning a lot more via our revenue streams. But I'd need to come back to the committee over the exact net position.
Thank you. Councillor Wright-Mason.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I've had the pleasure of working with quite a few members of the team on the Churchgate consultation. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job. But as Steve pointed out, it's quite a small headcount, and obviously with some massive projects coming up, I just wondered, maybe an obvious answer from your perspective, but I suppose in your view, is there an urgency to maybe increase the headcount, especially with some huge projects coming up like Churchgate?
I'll go first, Steve, if that's okay. Thank you for highlighting that and just for noticing as well that we've got a lean team which are delivering a sort of phenomenal amount. I think we've already seen the benefit that's come this year from resolving some of the staffing issues in the estates side of the portfolio, and that is being felt, particularly with Phil coming on in, I think it was March this year. Yeah. Not just in terms of the estates portfolio, but that expertise is being felt directly on the Churchgate project itself. It's also being felt in the museum service with the Berrymead report. And so we are really feeling as a team the benefit of resolving those sort of slightly at the point that time in the past systemic challenges around resourcing the estates function. Most of the posts there are filled. We do have a current vacancy that we're still working on filling there. I think it is noted in the enterprise department that we also have some positions that we need to fill. I think we also need to be really mindful with the project like Churchgate that we are filling those projects at the right time and bringing in the right expertise. And one of the pieces of work that the team are doing currently is on the economic development strategy. There is a change of direction following the change of government on that. That's being worked through at county level. And we will want to understand what the sort of future of that looks like before we make sort of longer term changes to the staffing structure. But I think we definitely would benefit from the additional hands. That's a given, and also additional expertise in that area. But Steve, I'm sure you've got some other comments to add as well.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. You covered virtually everything that I was going to mention, so nothing much that I will add. The only additional item to add is that within the capital, in terms of Churchgate project itself, we also have put aside 250k specifically for those experts. And if we need more than that, obviously we can request more. But when we set that project up, that was something which was specifically set aside, and we are not using all of that money sort of at this point in time, but we will use what we need. If we do need more, then we will obviously request that.
Councillor Wright.
This is a question around the economic development and tourism strategy. I think there's a mention that going forward, the council aims to build a stronger relationship with businesses in order to promote the growth and engagement within the district. I just wondered if you're able to say a little bit more about how you plan to do this.
I think the first point to highlight on that one, Councillor Wright, is the strength of the relationships with the bids. And I think we'd say that the relationships that we have with the bids are in a stronger position than they have been sort of in the past, which is really a key part of that. I think a lot will depend on the future strategy, the future shape of the economic development strategy, which we're working to make sure we're aligned with what the work that Hertfordshire Futures and the county is doing on that, in terms of making sure that we've got the right kinds of structures and mechanisms in place to be doing that work. But Steve, do you have anything else to add?
I may refer to Chloe, but I know of in the report, which I'm trying to find a specific paragraph, but within the work which we've been doing on the actual strategy and the question or the phone calls and speaking to the different companies, we are also building, I guess, relationships via that, which hopefully as we go forward, we can use those companies to help us and be part of whatever the outcome is in terms of the work program and how we work closer with them. So I will refer to Chloe if she was to add anything more to that. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. So yeah, just a couple of points to build on that. So we're looking at organising sort of business networking forums, so bringing businesses of all shapes and sizes and industries together. We know that the connectivity between not all of our businesses, but some of our business businesses aren't great between the towns and more rural areas. At the moment, as a council, we signpost in terms of helping businesses, but going forward, we want to really support them. You know, if a new business is setting up, for example, providing them with the resources, or at least helping them on their journey to setting up and remaining consistent. So more events, as I sort of said, forums, but also more events more specifically. So we know that organisations such as Hearts Futures and the Growth Board, they continually host events to pull businesses together to, as I said, create those networking opportunities and to do business. And we want to very much be a part of that going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Just want to go back to the numbers again, because the sole purpose of having a enterprise, a commercial department, is to generate additional revenue for us to then be able to go and fund council services and invest in other strategies. I must say, £160,000 is not that larger figure or larger sum in comparison to the council's budget. I mean, if you wanted to be harsh, you might say that the department is barely breaking even and paying for itself. So I've got two questions. What work are we doing in order to actually increase that figure so that we have more revenue in order to go and invest in council services? And the second question is, what are we learning from best practice from other local authorities? For example, Broxbourne, that has an absolutely superb commercial strategy and really does generate an awful lot of income to fund its services.
Councillor Thomas?
I think I'll come back to the need possibly to make sure we are taking out some of the separating out the museum costs from that, because I think if you look at the cost line, there's a significant aspect there. So I'm not sure it's entirely fair to work from that figure, but I appreciate it's the figure in front of you, Councillor Munzer. I think I'll turn to Chloe and Phil, I think, perhaps to share some highlights from the Churchgate scheme, which is obviously a significant scheme in the enterprise function, but also Phil in terms of this dispersal programme. But perhaps Chloe, you would like to go first.
Yeah, so just a point to note, really. So obviously, when this department started, it was very much the commercial department, and that's when where the commercial strategy was born and adopted, and that very much focuses on income generation, as you say. I think since then, we've obviously had a change in focus in terms of we're now the enterprise department, and appreciate that looking at savings and efficiencies and income generation is still very much part of our portfolio and part of my role. But we've since acquired Churchgate, which, as we all know, is a huge, or will be a huge project. So I think it's fair to say that that's obviously been a focus of mine, certainly. But I just wanted to kind of give you the reassurance that I am working on refreshing the current commercial strategy, because I totally realise that it's not in line with how the team, as in myself, is operating. So we need to incorporate Churchgate, and we need to address and include things like KPIs in terms of income generation to make sure that we are monitoring how we are doing that as a council. But as I said, I think the focus has been on Churchgate amongst the other projects that I work on. So once I refresh that strategy, we'll have a clearer focus and a clearer direction of what commercial means at North Hearts. Bill, I don't know if you wanted to come in at that point.
So I've been in post since mid-March, as Councillor Thomas said. So I'm just getting to grips with the portfolio at the moment. But I mean, Councillor Munster's absolutely right. We are there to maximise the revenue and returns for the council, and I can assure you that's what we're doing in the team. So we're having a thorough look across the portfolio. We're making sure that we're absolutely up to date on all lease renewals or rent reviews. We're also in discussion with some tenants about re-gearing their leases. So we've got a lot of long leasehold industrial properties in Royston and elsewhere, where we've got some inquiries about extending leases. We can generate capital receipts at that point, or better revenue returns and faster rent reviews, etc. We've got some underutilized assets that we've turned into new commercial ventures, such as the former WCs at Royston, which have been turned into, I don't know if you know about that one, but turned into a sort of coffee shop, and that's generating £5,500 a year. We've got a former Meltax office in Royston, which we're currently looking at. We've got a capital bid in to see if we can do some initial works and then get that away. Just to focus on Churchgate, we're re-tendering the management contract at the moment. So, and we've rewritten specification. So we will be making real efforts to retain and attract new tenants in a difficult time for retail, but also a difficult time with the pending redevelopment. But we're absolutely focused on getting the right agent to do that. It may be the current agent, but it may not. So that's a bit of an overview. And we've got a number of capital receipts projects coming through, which we're actively working on all of them. They're all unique in their timescales, but we're making sure we will deliver the maximum capital receipt for the council.
Thank you. Yes, just to add to that, it's not just also what we do within our department, it's also how we work with other departments and some of the work that is being done there. So, for example, we've worked alongside Careline and some of the initiatives that they're undertaking now and also looking into, which will also generate income into the council. I think we need to be aware that it isn't just about what the department does. And as Chloe said, going back 3 or 4 years, it was that commercial drive. We changed it to an enterprise focus, which therefore brought in economic development side of things. So it's not just the financial side. We know that there's a legislation change which is set out within 8.4.2, which therefore prevents what we can do, or restricts, shall I say, what we can do. So therefore our focus as a council has changed in recent times. So some of the opportunities which we used to go after, we can't go after now. And therefore that limits what we can look for. But there are still things which we are working heavily on to improve. Either that's the assets we currently have, or if there is opportunity for other assets, for example, Hartness Court, that's gone into the company now. The company is now up and running. All 4 flats are fully let. So there are still things that we're doing within the department, but we have had to change based on what we are and what we aren't allowed to do.
Thank you. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you, Chairman. Steve just picked up on a point that I was going to come back to, which was the business of bringing enterprise and the enterprise strategy within the commercial remit altogether. And I'm concerned that the two are really very different. I entirely understand the need for the council to maximise its income from every conceivable opportunity. And it's clear from this report there's an awful lot of effort being made. We can argue about the numbers and whatever, but I'm concerned that in amongst that, the enterprise strategy, in other words, looking after the businesses that are based in the district, there's a tendency for that to get lost, because I think the two things are very different. I'm concerned that there's very little detail. I mean, just to take one point, this is considered to be a project. And if you were running an SME within North Herts District Council, you would not like to be thought of as a project. It's a matter of survival. And the council does have a strong part to play in supporting the businesses, which of course are employing vast numbers of our residents. And I'm worried that there doesn't seem to be any real grasp of how to support those businesses, or any real. I appreciate what Chloe was saying about engagement through networking and all the rest of it. This is already being done. There are chambers of commerce. There are all sorts of networking groups out there. They're all struggling. I don't know how the council, by reinventing the wheel, could really achieve anything more than that. I'm concerned there's no statistics in here about how many businesses there actually are in the district. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Steve. I shouldn't really be. I should be looking over there. how many businesses actually are there? What is the split between the SMEs, the micro businesses, and the corporates? Interestingly, under section C, paragraph C, interviews with 15 local businesses doesn't sound like a very big number to me. I suspect there are a few more than 15 businesses in the district. I mean, how would, Chloe, if you don't mind, how would you categorize the engagement that you're actually getting from the business community? I suspect the answer is fairly poor, and that's not a reflection necessarily on the council, because businesses generally don't engage. They don't engage with councils, they don't engage with networking organisations, they don't engage with chambers of commerce. And apathy is partly to blame, but also the fact is, running a small business it's difficult in this day and age, and I don't want to even go anywhere near the recent budget.
Councillor Prescott.
I'm concerned that by linking the two, we're losing the enterprise part of that. What can we do about that?
Okay, I think there are a few questions in there.
Yeah, there were a few. Sorry.
I think it's a concern that is shared, and I don't want you to think that it's not something that's being proactively worked on. And I would definitely encourage you to stay engaged, as I know you will do, on the economic development strategy as it comes in the first quarter of the next not academic year. Sorry, I work in higher education. In the next calendar year, because I think it's something that the team are doing a lot of thinking about at the moment as part of the strategy development process. While we are guided by the timeline that Hertfordshire County Council is working on and Hertfordshire Futures is working on, we are working with the same set of consultants to ensure that there's alignment there. There has been a lot of work that has been going on this year. It's not that work hasn't been going on. That's including interviews with businesses, but I think the particularly interesting sort of part of that work is both the spatial or geographic considerations and the geographic lens that's being applied to sort of physically, where are those businesses located, where are they urban, where are they rural, as well as the sort of sectoral aspects. So what are those key industries, and looking at the connections both in our district, but our district's location between Stevenage and Luton, the Cambridge and London factor. And so I think there is a good amount of work to do. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but I think that's why the economic development strategy process that's being worked on now is going to be so important. But I'm sure Chloe has comments to add to that as well.
Yeah, just a couple of builds on that. So just to be super clear, when I referred to the updating the commercial strategy, that is separate from the economic development and tourism strategy that focuses on businesses and better business engagement. Going back to the economic development strategy, so as a result of the things that are identified within that strategy, there will be an action plan with KPIs, and there will be measurables. So, and when we have that action plan, I'm more than happy to share it with whoever wants to see it before it's adopted, because that really talks about the tangible outputs and what we're looking to do and how we're looking to do it. And what works well for some businesses might not work best for others. Going back to the 15 businesses, so that is just a sample. Obviously, we realise that there's way more than 15 businesses in the district, but also we've been doing a lot of work, as Tamsin alluded to, with our bids. So connecting to the businesses via our bids and their existing relationships and generally good relationships that they have with the businesses across predominantly towns, obviously, but we have been engaging with, for example, businesses in the industrial estate. And you are quite right, Councillor, we have had kind of some businesses just not engaging at all for various reasons. So we are conscious of that, and we have built that into our economic development strategy plan, and thinking about how we can tap into those businesses, what their issue is, why they don't want to work with the council. So although we're talking about kind of all the good things and the good things that our large businesses kind of want to put back into the community and how they want to work with the council, we do absolutely recognise that there's a large proportion of businesses that aren't engaging with the council for various different reasons. And, you know, ultimately they're the people that we want to speak to and really sort of engage with somehow.
Really quickly, it's really just a plea to understand the difference between the corporates and the SMEs. There's an enormous number of SMEs, and they really need to be treated very, very differently. I've just really, as I say, it's just a plea to be aware of the different way of treating different sizes of businesses.
Thank you, Councillor Prescott. Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think sort of as colleagues have alluded to, it would be really useful to have outside of this meeting that breakdown and split out of the finances for the museum and the town hall, because to my mind, actually, they're kind of two distinct and separate ventures. We talk about them in one lump because of how the project was handled historically, but I think we do need to have that clear differentiation of the budget lines. And when we're thinking about the KPIs as well, in particular in respect of a museum, I think what we also need to ensure that we are measuring and reporting and feeding back on, both within the department but also to colleagues across the council, is those social value KPIs and how we effectively measure those. Because to my mind, as brilliant as it is to sell out speaking events and engagements, that's not necessarily showing me what the social value is. It's not showing how many children we've reached, engaged, empowered, got involved, how we're maintaining, protecting cultural heritage. So I think it would be beneficial to really reflect on the cultural and social value KPIs that we can access and obtain, maybe reference through to ONS data and the way that they collect information as well, to make sure that we're capturing that value and understanding the social return on investment that we get from the museum, not just the hard and fast financials of it. The other points that I wanted to just quickly touch on and just flag as a point of caution is that anybody outside of the council space that scrolls through the list of projects would be entirely forgiven for thinking that all the council cares about is Hitchin, because the majority of the large projects on this list, when I scroll through, and I can get away with saying this as a Hitchin councillor, it's very Hitchin heavy. So I think, you know, again, some outward reassurance that we are working to deliver benefits in economic and social terms across the entire district, not just focused in one particular town, would be really beneficial. And actually selling the wider social benefits of projects that happen to be located in one space would help to secure buy-in and support for the work that the portfolio is providing. Really pleased to hear Chloe sort of reference very briefly potential to work and create kind of incubator hubs as part of the economic development strategy. I think that's fantastic. We all know that the LEP's been absorbed by county, so I understand and appreciate some of the challenges that need to be bridged. Totally get the parent-child relationship with Hearts Futures as well, and thinking about how our economic development strategy fits in that space. My absolute plea would be, please remember that there are areas that do not have business improvement districts. One of our towns doesn't have a business improvement district. And as you know from the department work plan, there's a number of businesses adversely affected by a major event within the last 18 months there that are going to need support. So my ask would be, please ensure that any economic development strategy covers the entire district, all business types, and continue that good work to reach out and engage with businesses where a bid isn't particularly present. I hear the answer to Councillor Prescott's points on that. And as part of the sort of conversation around economic development strategy, I would query sort of where community wealth building sits in this space as well as a potential partner. And when we're thinking about some of the financial burdens on the council, is there a greater role that supporting and encouraging community wealth building and utilisation of assets of community value and supporting community groups could play in kind of spreading that load and assisting us? And then the final point, obviously, I say obviously, it's obvious to my mind. The portfolio title is Enterprise and the Arts. We've heard lots about enterprise, a little bit about culture in respect of one significant project. I'm not seeing a huge arts offer here. So query, what's going on in the arts space to support creatives and the role that the arts play as an economic driver in the district? Sorry, that was a lot of points and a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think there are 5 questions altogether. I was going to ask about the arts as well later, but do you want to respond to any of that, Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, I think I've written notes around my piece of paper, so I might take those in not the order that they were made. So I hope that that still works. I think the first one, the point around the number of Hitchin projects, and I think that's is noted. I think part of that is legacy of where does the council own assets, and so that there's an element of that being at play. But I think as we'll come on to in the next agenda item, for example, Berrymead Museum is one of the largest capital projects. In that, we are not viewing that project through the lens of a Hitchin. We are looking all over the district for solutions for that. Which I hope will come through in the paper. And I think also when you look at the estates project, we have sites in Royston, in Baldock, in Letchworth, that we are proactively working on. And I think I was going to ask Steve whether you wanted to give some updates in terms of your work in Baldock on the fire recovery, which I think would be relevant to those points. I think more broadly on the social and cultural value KPIs, that's something I would actually value working with you. I have actually emailed the LGA to get guidance from them on that, a former employee of the British Council. I'm very familiar with the importance of having those KPIs to balance out the economic ones. So if that's something that's of interest, that's something I would be very keen to explore with other councillors as well. But yeah, I'll pause there.
I can cover Baldock very quickly, and then I was also going to go to Rob with regards to the arts, but it's a fair point. The other thing, not when I say this, I'll probably get this wrong way round. The questions and the projects we were asked to report back on were the ones that we have reported back on. So apologies if they just seem to be within Hitchin. And also just going back to a previous point, yes, I appreciate these aren't what we'd always call projects. Some of these are just work and tasks that we're doing. So maybe the title, we could have used a better title. So just, yeah, and take that forward going, when we come back at another time, we'll ensure that we do also look wider than just Hitchin. With regards to Baldock, without going through the full history, but I think most people are aware of the fire which took place at the industrial site. At the time or after the incident took place, I was put forward as the lead officer for the council in terms of recovery. Now, that's not necessarily means that we, the council, are responsible for delivering or the outcome of that. It's more about I've been working with the actual industrial estate and specific companies and the overall company over there to try to find a way forward with them. It's been a very challenging period of time, and it's been over a year now that has been going on, and the main reason for that is it's not a simple way to resolve, because there's a number of companies there. They're all individually responsible or owners of their own building, but then as a whole there is the industrial estate. So we have been working, and there has been specific lead companies, I guess, or individuals which have been ultimately responsible for what they wish to do on that site. They have put forward a pre-application submission to look at the demolition of the majority of the buildings that were impacted in terms of the fire, and therefore aren't able to rebuild them or amend them. So we've been liaising directly with them, and they are very close to getting that approved as a group, because they need to also agree the costs for that work. Once that's been done, then they'll put forward the actual submission to undertake the work, and then hopefully within the near future, and I say near future, it's hard to give a time frame on this because, as I've already said, this has been going on for over a year, but the aim would be to demolish the site, will be some units which won't come down, and they're the units which weren't as affected by the fire to the same degree as others. And they should, there's no guarantee at this moment, but they should be able to stay in situ. They may need some additional works to keep them in place. And then the team will be looking to see how and what they will put in the future. Like I say, it isn't a council's project or anything that we are responsible for. We are purely liaising with them to help them through this difficult time. So that, I know it wasn't something which was covered directly in here, but that's a very quick overview of that specific project. I'll refer to Rob on the art side.
Yeah, thank you. So to come back on the arts point, I think on a county level, we certainly engage with how we're trying to lead on that. The Hearts Year of Culture, some of you may be familiar with, was unfortunately scheduled for 2020, and we all know what happened with that. And since then, I think there's been a void really in terms of the cultural leadership. County-wide leadership on this, but I myself attend the Hearts Association of Cultural Officers. There are conversations ongoing in that space around how we take a more county level lead on that and how that trickles down to the different districts. One of the initiatives that's currently taking place in that, in collaboration with the University of Hertfordshire, is to really reinvest in the Creative Hertfordshire website, which is a county-wide offering that is intended to support arts and culture businesses and ventures and individuals of all sizes across the county. And the idea behind that is that this will provide signposting information for various grants. It will provide a sort of one-stop shop for a lot of helpful information for those groups. So I'm very much engaging in that and keeping others informed as that develops. And hopefully that will see us get back on our feet as a county in terms of Hertfordshire. But I appreciate your question is more around the district. So on that point, we obviously are a museum service, but we also do a lot in terms of the arts space. We've had a lot of art groups come in. We have our Arches space where we can put their works on display, and we certainly signpost other artistic ventures that are going on and things like that. My colleague Roz also attends various sessions with some of the museums locally, supports them with things like interview and providing that kind of curatorial expertise where perhaps their resources don't extend to the cross section of our kind of resourcing. And finally, the other point I'd make is that there is, of course, the North Herts Arts and Culture Networking Group, which Ros again attends on behalf of the museum service, but is also spearheaded by our community engagement team. So we are doing some, but I accept that we could always do more.
Thank you. Councillor Bartos.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to echo my concerns about the council's engagement with businesses. I think that this is actually one of the biggest challenges that we face, being seen as being proactive across the district and being trusted as champions for them. I think it's great going through the various bids which do great work and engaging with businesses outside of the bid as well. But there are certainly many businesses that are members of these bids who don't engage because of all kinds of historic stuff. So I'm interested in that engagement, but I also wanted to say that I think whilst there is that challenge with the council as an organisation, that local councillors are a really good way to engage with that and get those contacts. So we should be using that. And related to this is I want to understand more about how the council is proactively helping people looking to move into the enterprising space, just in terms of what the offer is and why they should bring their business into the district, and particularly as well driving an increase within the cooperative sector locally as well. So what are we doing to drive this? Thank you.
Chloe, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, okay. So Just to sort of reassure you, as part of the brief for writing our economic development strategy, it focuses quite heavily on why North Herts is a good place to A, start a business, and B, work. We've really emphasised on the fact that North Herts is perfectly placed, sort of using the inward investment from it was used at UK Reef sort of phrasing, but as I said, we've really sort of honed in on the fact that North Herts is a great place to work, to start a business, but also to live. And it's going back to the connectivity point that I made earlier, and I know Tamsin touched on, those strong links between London, Luton, Stevenage, and Cambridge. So that is one of our key sort of themes and key focus areas on, making North Herts an attractive place to work, but also to live. So you've kind of got the full package there. As I said earlier, we have a overarching strategy, but what sits under that is kind of more important, which is the action plan, and it will talk about how we're going to do that. So actually talking about tangible KPIs and measurables. So once that is delivered, and as I said earlier, we are working with Herts Futures to help us do that. I'm happy to share that. The action plan isn't written yet. We've just sort of discovered, or we've just written the key themes and how we're looking to achieve. So in terms of tangible outputs, that isn't ready yet, but I'm happy to share it when it is.
Thank you, Chloe. Do you want anything else? Or? No, you don't have to. Just you looked like you were.
I guess the only thing to add is, I think it's fair to say, and we're not hiding from it, is that recently, due to the overall staffing that we've got within the department, we have been struggling to do some of these tasks. And I know it's been flagged up before that this is something which should have been done over a year ago. So I think we'll take that on board, that we are behind where we want to be, but we're confident that we're doing what is right within this strategy to put us in a stronger position as we go forward. And that will also set out what resources we'll need, and therefore there may be the need to have more resources to ensure we can deliver the strategy. And as Chloe said, there'll be a clear action plan or work program that we'll work towards, and we'll then bring that to yourself, so we'll be able to be measured against that.
Cool. Thank you. I've got a couple of detailed questions that I'm going to ask. So on 8.5.7 Thomas Bellamy House, is there any news on that since the report was put together?
No, it's something we've got interest from a couple of parties. I won't perhaps say who they are at the moment, but no, I've got to do more work on the costing report, the potential returns, so that I can come back with a recommendation of whether we progress with a letting or consider a disposal possibly. So yeah, there is more work to be done on that.
Okay, thank you. And then on the capital receipts, the trend seems to be going downwards to zero currently in the current year. So we know we've got quite an expansive capital program to fund, and this is a big input to that. What is going on to change that position?
Yeah, there is none for this year, but there are. Yeah, that's up till that point. But there is in the capital plan forecast capital receipts going forward. And the majority of those are residential development sites, active work is going on to bring those forward as fast as we can.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you. So a few more questions then, Councillor Manser.
Thank you. We've talked an awful lot this evening about the new economic development and tourism strategy, but obviously there was a precursor to that document. And therefore, what I want to know is, with respect to the old economic development and tourism strategy, or whatever it was called at that point, Was it successful? And secondly, what lessons have we learned that have, flowed through when producing this new economic development and tourism strategy?
As you were there at the council at the time, you might be best placed to respond to that substantively. But Councillor Munster, that's a question that's also been on my mind as a new executive, and that the team have been asked to sort of make sure that they review and learn from as part of the forming of the new strategy. But I think given that Steve's got more tenure on most of us, he's probably more able to answer that question.
I have. However, I wasn't responsible for that strategy, the previous strategy. Therefore, we inherited that as department. I think the key lesson that we've learned from that is to try to ensure that we're being realistic at what we're looking to achieve, and also making it very clear. And I think it's been said here, it's been said at other meetings about ensuring that we have the right resources to undertake that strategy. And also within that, we have a clear action plan. So they were the key things that I would take from that. It's hard to evaluate the previous one because there were lots of things which I identified within that, but there wasn't a specific work program, action plan, KPIs, and so forth. So that was one of the key things that we've taken from this new one. I don't know if there's anything else, Chloe, that you wish to add to it.
Just really wanted to highlight that in the previous strategy, it talks about sort of providing grant support and sort of searching for different grants available to the council. And as part of that, Andrew and my team, he is the only economic development officer I have, and he's part-time. So he works part-time for North Herts and part-time for East Herts in the same or similar role. And the Shared Prosperity Fund has been delivered as part of or under that strategy for the last 3 years. And we know that just like looking across the different successful projects that have been delivered, they have made a real difference in the community, and that's kind of on a town basis. But also now we've recently allocated money to community groups into parishes and other local groups. So we know that that is a success as a result of the economic development department as a whole, but it was mentioned also in the strategy as a key theme.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson.
Thank you. Just to go back onto this thing about the economic development plan or strategy. It's somewhat frustrating to be here having these discussions without sight of this plan, because there seems to be a massive void where it would be nice to be able to see some flesh on the bones of some of these aspirational points, because a lot of this report is written basically in the future tense, isn't it? And it would be nice to see the whole strategy as it's intended to be read. And so I just wanted to confirm that the report says that this will finally emerge in March. Is that right? And the reason for that is because you're waiting for Hertfordshire to do their plan before you can do yours, as well as staffing issues alongside all of that. Is that correct?
It's not that the team are waiting, and the team, that there is a draft that does exist, but it's that the consequences of the change in policy could have a material impact on the resourcing that would follow. So we need to make sure that the strategy speaks to the available resource to execute it, which will become clearer in March. But in terms of all of the work around the evidence base, looking at starting to build the relationships, there's actually been a huge amount of work that has been happening as part of that. But yes, I think it would be wise for us to come back here, in the future, when and not too distant future, when we have the, as you say, more meat on the bones to offer you.
Thank you. We can certainly consider that in the work programme, I think. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you. I'm going to come back on the enterprise strategy again. Can I just ask or suggest that instead of relying exclusively on no doubt highly paid consultants, that you actually engage with some of the businesses before you put pen to paper to finalise your strategy? Because it's all very well having a strategy, but if the vast majority of small businesses turn around and say, so what? Then it's a waste of everybody's time and effort. There are plenty of businesses out there that will engage and will be wanting to take part in this. And a good place to start would, I suggest, be the Chambers of Commerce.
Chloe, do you want to comment on the business engagement that has happened as part of the evidence base that's been built?
Nothing really further to add than I've already sort of mentioned earlier. But I take your point regarding Chamber of Commerce. You know, we do actually work really closely with them as one of our kind of close organisations that we get a lot of data from. We regularly meet Andrew and my team, as I mentioned earlier. He regularly meets with them. He attends their networking events, and they are very much kind of aware of our strategy and want to be involved and are interested in how we roll that out. So they're kind of almost like acting almost like a critical friend and helping us to tap into those businesses that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I take your point in terms of actually speaking to the businesses before a final version of this strategy is adopted, and that is very much what we are going to do. The Tamsin just mentioned the evidence base. So the evidence base is kind of a large document that our consultants have done, and that does include our various interviews, as I said earlier, with our different types of businesses. But I think it's fair to say that we haven't just kind of taken exactly what those businesses have said and drafted our economic development strategy just based on those. A lot of work has gone into this strategy prior, and we do recognise that ongoing stakeholder and business engagement, you know, is going to happen throughout kind of the adoption, well, pulling together this final version of the strategy, the adoption of the strategy and rolling it out. It's not just up to kind of me or the consultants to deliver this strategy. It's very much, we see it as a two-way process, and it's working alongside and with our businesses to ultimately deliver what's best for them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure.
My experience is does not support what you've just told us, but I don't want to prolong the agony of this conversation. I'm very happy to engage outside of this meeting to see how we can do something about that.
That's fine.
Thank you. Okay, are there any further questions? No. Okay. In which case, we'll move to the recommendation, which is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the report. I will propose that. Can I have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Claydon. Thank you. Is there any debate? Yeah, Councillor Manser.
Thank you, Chair. And can I first of all just thank Steve and your team for being here this evening and answering a wide variety of questions. It's very, very interesting to be able to get a much better understanding about actually what the Directorate does and go into, because the devil really is in the detail. So get down into it. Just a few observations, and I want to start on Churchgate because we've talked a lot about it this evening. It is, of course, potentially going to be the most significant investment and project that the Directorate and indeed the Council is going to undertake over the next couple of years. I think something of which was highlighted during the Corporate Peer Challenge, and obviously we're still awaiting the full report, but there's too much focus on it. It's important that we put enough focus and resource in it to ensure that actually, you know, we evaluate all of the options and ensure that the project is potentially going to be a success should the council proceed with regeneration. But equally as well, we are not going to see any significant economic benefit from the Churchgate project for quite a long period of time. And therefore, we need to make sure that we're looking at other opportunities within the short and the medium term to ensure that actually, we are subsidizing our income and our revenue. And I fear that had too much blind focus, blind vision, as it were, on Churchgate, and that might have potentially been to the detriment of other opportunities. Moving on then to the economic development strategy, because it's really important that, first of all, we're learning the lessons from the former strategy. There's no point implementing something of which we've sort of tried to do before. And it's really important that we're actually focusing on the wider district impact, not just on the bids or the urban core, but equally the businesses and the economic opportunities within rural communities as well. Many rural communities across our district are going to be growing as a result of the local plan, and it's really important that the council is working to harness those opportunities, those growth opportunities there. And something which is quite clear within the report is about resourcing. There's no point having this strategy if we're not actually going to back it up with the resource in order to actually make the change. Nor is it worth having if we're not actually going to be able to measure it against anything. So it's really important that we have key performance indicators to actually measure success. That's something of which, unfortunately, this evening we haven't been able to determine of the previous strategy. Then focusing towards the investment approach. I think this is a whole council strategy. It's not just focused on the commercial enterprise directorate at all, but where we are going to be making significant investment, there needs to be a business case. The business case needs to stack up. The project needs to be able to pay for itself, because otherwise we're just going to increase the perilous financial situation that we currently are in as a council. And I think as well that it's something that Overview and Scrutiny needs to keep under constant review, because of course, there are so many opportunities within the directorate, and we really want to make sure that the team is harnessing as much as possible there in order to actually deliver those capital receipts and that additional revenue. As well as learning from what other local authorities are doing, both in Hertfordshire and further afield as well, making sure that we're learning from that best practice. We obviously talked a lot about sort of finance and figures, and I think there are growth opportunities. As I said, I think we need to keep it under review, and potentially if the situation doesn't improve by this time next year, we might want to have a task and finish group to look into further detail about sort of, the opportunities, how the directorate's running, because ultimately we want the team to be able to achieve its fullest potential in order to deliver the best possible outcomes for this council and our residents as well. But thank you very much for all of your hard work that you're doing.
Councillor Munson, anyone else? No? Okay. Yeah, I want to thank you for engaging with this process. The first time we've done this as a group, and I think it's been very fruitful. We've had lots of excellent questions and points being made. There's clearly interest in the economic development and commercial strategies, and as they're developed, I think we'll definitely be interested in getting those to come back. And also noting obviously the resource challenges and the need for a kind of clear action plan around how you're going to use those to actually deliver any of this. Okay, cool. I think if there's no further debate, then we should move to the vote. I haven't seen any. Yeah, let's move to the vote. Thank you.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to propose that we take a short break because we are probably going to need it ahead of the next one, to be honest. Should we come back? Let's say I'll make it 9:08 now. Should I make it 9:20 to come back? 9:15? Yeah. 9:15. Okay. Okay, can we get started again now, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to move now to item 12, which is the museum storage options appraisal. Councillor Tamsin Thomas to present.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good feeling from my perspective to be here with this appraisal report on the options for resolving the museum storage issues. I want to particularly thank officers in preparing what was a comprehensive report, and to thank committee members for reading such a comprehensive report. We know that this is a project that has been ongoing, and we are keen to see movement on this project. And so wanted to make sure that committee members had a full view of the range of options that officers have been exploring and will be putting to Cabinet next week on the 19th. The primary purpose of this note is to showcase the range of options that have been explored in some depth, albeit still at a summary level. But the primary objective is to be able to focus the onward efforts of our officers on the most viable options for resolving the ongoing museum storage issues. The other sort of point I wanted to make at this stage was to acknowledge the members of the committee who've actually been to the Berrymead site and who've taken that time across from all parties to make sure that they've seen with their own eyes the pressures on the building, because I think that is a really important factor. As you all know, the museum service provides a continual historical record of our district that has been built over a few hundred years now by historians and scientists. It is an incredibly rich resource. Our curators have an active approach to collection management. They judiciously seed items into the collection to ensure that continual record of our district is maintained. But they also continually deassess or remove items from the collection to ensure that we're using our storage capacity and our resources effectively. The collection, however, by its nature, does continue to grow. And if you've been in the building, you've seen that there is not much room in there, and there's not much room in the outhouses at the Berrymead site either. Alongside the collection growing, it's also worth highlighting that the building at Berrymead was only ever intended as a stopgap measure. I think over 30 years ago, it was not intended to be used for more than a handful of years. And it was never kitted out to perform its function for the long term. The building is well past its predicted lifespan. And in the recent storms, our officers were there in their wellies with buckets and dehumidifiers to execute their duties to protect the collection, which they did. But we need to come up with a long-term solution, both on the fundamentals. We need to look after our heritage and our resources. We have a mandate to do that. But also it is a key part of us being able to renew our accreditation. We last went through that process in 2019, and accreditation is an incredibly valuable status that enables us to host visiting exhibitions, which our footfall numbers are entirely sort of dependent on, or not entirely, but significantly dependent on. It is also the basis of applying for the vast majority of grants that are available to museum services. So be that capital grants, such as for the main facility that was built in Hitchin Town Centre, be that grants for museum storage, but also project-based grants and the curatorial grants that enable our curators to do the type of work that they do. And our team has a proven track record of being able to attract that type of funding. In the paper before you, you see the result of a number of administrations' work, and the previous administration prepared a proposal for a purpose-built facility at the Berrymead site, one that would provide the right temperature controls, the right spaces for preservation work, and also provide access to the public and researchers who may wish to access the items. And that represents the ideal, and that was one of the options. But we are very conscious that this authority must be prudent with its resources. So I'm coming into post and supported by the appointment of Phil into our estates team. I asked officers to contact the C-suite officials of all of the museums and local authorities in the local area, and include so both the council owned but also non-council owned museums that were comparable, to inquire about their strategic long-term storage needs. I also asked officers to approach senior leaders at all of the major funders. There are not many people who fund in the museum storage space, to inquire about the future of funding for capital projects of this type. And I also asked our estates team to get involved in the project and to review the initial proposal that had been developed, and to come up with a full range of options so that this council does know exactly what it has to work with by way of providing an ongoing solution. So what you have in front of you is a paper, and it does help to print it. And I would refer people to particularly to the summary chart to get a sort of snapshot view. Is you see there the sort of three shorter term options, the sort of kick it down the road options that that are there, which is sort of looking at what's the minimum that we can do in the near term to make the building as watertight and safe as we can, and to address some of the immediate storage pressures. But you also have a series of longer term options as well. Looking through those options, my view is it is preferable to find a long-term option when you spend much time in that building day to day. It's hard to sort of see any long-term solution in that building as it is. Option A is there to provide a baseline for comparison. Option B is sort of the minimal to maintain our minimal commitments to the collection in terms of the collection as it is, and the safeguarding of the collection as it is. And C starts to look at ensuring that we don't break that continual capture of our history, and that we are able to provide some flex on storage capabilities. In my view, options D and officers will be able to provide more detail. Options D, E, and H provide the sort of clearest terms to a long-term solution and are worth further exploration and costing. Option G was one where we were keen to make sure that we didn't already have an asset in our ownership, that a different asset in our ownership that we could utilise. And option F was looking at leasehold. Leasehold is one that we should absolutely keep on the table, but just be aware it does present some real sort of strategic long-term challenges. What happens to the collection at the end of the life of its life? It also removes our ability to apply for certain grants. So before you have our best efforts to show a range of hugely different options, and we've looked across the entire district to provide these options, and we've also looked at ways we might collaborate near our district to help alleviate these. But as I said, it feels like a really concrete step forward on this project to have 8 tangible options that I look forward to hearing the views of members of this committee on as we take this to Cabinet.
Thank you. Any of the officers want to add anything at this point, or wait for the questions? We'll wait for the questions, that's okay.
happy to do so, but I think it's
Yeah, sure.
could be covered by the questions.
Okay, fine. Let's go Councillor Tyson first then.
Thank you, Tamsin, and thank you for everyone who's put in so much effort into preparing this extensive report. I just want to cut very quickly to the point about option H, which you just mentioned as being one that should be pursued further. It doesn't feature in the recommendations, and I just wonder if we can make an amendment to those either now or at some point during the debate. I'm not quite sure what the appropriate moment for that would be, but I would suggest that in 2.6 that could be changed to say C, F, and H.
Editorial-ish reasons that but we support that, Tom. But I think Rob, it might be helpful if you provide context on that.
Yes, no reason why not, and fully accept that that could happen. Just for the sake of clarity, the reason it's not mentioned is because the council is not, if you like, in the driving seat over that option. The facility is wholly owned by another party, and therefore that option would not go off the table through this process. However, totally understand if you wanted to make that more formal.
Thank you. Did you have anything else?
Yes, I was just wanted to point out that I think the wording of 2.6 allows some sort of flexibility in that, and therefore it could be cover both sides of it.
Yeah, just before we get into the meat of the report, similarly on the recommendations, 2.2 and 2.3, my understanding is what Cabinet is being asked to approve is to spend part of the allocation on furthering the development of the options. I don't think that's clear from the way that the recommendations are written. So again, I'd probably look to amend that to make it slightly more clear, but it'd be good if you could outline exactly what it is that Cabinet's being asked to approve.
I think, and that is a key part of this, is that to take any of the not all of the options forward, i.e. option H, but some of these options will start to incur cost given the scale of the project to develop them more fully. Rob, do you want to comment on that further?
Yes, certainly. So in terms of the recommendation around the £30,000 first and foremost, that is in order to progress the investigations up to planning application stage over a possible warehouse solution on the site. I'll leave it to Phil in a moment to cover off the merits of that and why that's an option we wish to pursue from an estates angle. But I think because we own the site, and because this will sort of provide us, in terms of the long-term high-cost options, with a benchmark against which all of the others can be judged, that makes sense to pursue. At least that's what officers' view is. Hence why it's in the report as that recommendation. In terms of the other 20k figure, that is again something that I'd ask Phil to come in on. However, essentially it is around, if a property were to come to market in the near term, we don't want to start cold in terms of investigating that. It may be that a suitable property were to come to market tomorrow and we want to start moving on that rather than wait for the committee cycle in order to identify budget to begin pursuing that, or at least exploring it. So I'll hand over to Phil at that point to give his thoughts on those two from an estates angle. But just before I do, perhaps it's worth mentioning, in terms of the 30k investment in the current site, I note that the report could perhaps be clearer over which of the options identified under option D this is to pursue. So for the sake of clarity, that's for the warehouse-based solution, which Phil will explain why we think that's an option worth pursuing, rather than the other proposal that's listed there.
Okay, just to clarify, so that's referred to as the revised proposal in the report, is it? Not the Ash construction proposal?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah? Okay.
So yeah, I think what you want to know is why we'd need that initial in capital available for professional fees. And I think if I start with the Berrymead site, it would be to do some further costings, further pre-application planning advice, and have a planning ready scheme essentially, so that we've got more certainty on the deliverability and the cost. We're pretty confident. We've been to 3 external surveyors already who've provided advice for free on the level of cost, fees required, approximate build costs already. So we're very confident in the validity of the numbers we put in already, but clearly it does need further work. So that's really the 30,000. The 20,000, I think, is to enable us to do some very fast sort of valuation advice on anything that may come to the market, and due diligence, and make sure that we're acting professionally and we secure the right site at the right price. So that's essentially what that's to underpin. Did you have a third question? Was it about the
cover of why the warehouse allows us to pivot?
Oh, that one. Yeah, of course. And the reason we've moved towards, and again, external building surveyors have supported us on this. We've moved towards a more standard portal frame construction is for a number of reasons. It enables us to deliver sufficiently climate controlled space in there with some more detailed defined space within there, which can have the more delicate items stored, but also construction costs are going to be kept to a minimum on that. It also future proofs the site so that if for any reason we change provision for storage of facilities there, we've got an asset that the council own that would have certainly at the moment a very strong demand for industrial space in that area. So we feel it's protecting, rather than a bespoke building, it's something that would always have future value, alternative value possibly if needed. Certainly if we pursued the partnership option at a longer lifespan, that allows us to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I think I will look to amend those recommendations to make them more clear when we get to that point, but we'll go through the rest of the questions before we do that. I have submitted some questions in advance. I think I'll come back to those, though. I'm going to let some other people speak. So, Councillor Munter.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, if we go for a high-cost long-term option, it's going to cost this authority an awful lot of money. And therefore, we need to be looking at how we potentially recoup those costs, whether that be through a capital receipt or an income generation scheme. I know there was a previous scoping proposal, shall we say, about sort of a commercial storage unit. Obviously, that's come back and it's unviable. So would you just be able to go into a little bit more detail specifically about options D and E and how they differ in terms of income generation / capital receipts for the future?
Sorry for the deliberation. So just to make sure I'm framing your query correctly, option D is the redevelopment of the site, which will obviously leave us with a lot of the site left over to lease, to rent, to whatever we may wish to do with that. Whereas option E would leave us the entire site, which would leave us a larger capital receipt or long-term income if we decided to let it. So have I understood that query correctly?
Yeah.
Does that?
Yep.
I think I'll best pass over to Phil for the precise answer there. Thank you.
So I'm looking for where we've got the numbers on that. Is it towards the, excuse me for a minute. It's in the body of the report, is it? I mean, from my memory, I've just got to look it up now. I think, I think we gave a sort of ground lease value of about £50,000 for 50,000 on the whole site. If we were to release the storage from that site and take it purely back to commercial, we were looking at that. I can't recall immediately what we had in for a partial let, or if a sale of the site was going to be as £500,000 current capital value. And I'm just checking, may have to come back to you on that point about the partial release of land. Can I come back to you on that?
We'll just be able to add with respect to the sale of the site, is there a potential to increase the value of that land through planning permission, for example?
Yes, potentially, absolutely. Yeah.
You gauge that. I know
I'd
it's
need to
obviously
come back to
difficult,
you on, I
but-
think, on a bit more, some ideas of
Okay.
what we might be able to leverage that to if we could secure, an outline permission.
Yeah.
Say, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Just on those two options, the proposal to pursue a purchase of a new freehold or long leasehold building, in terms of the comparative costs of those options in Appendix 9, looks to be considerably more expensive. I'm just wondering why you think we should continue to pursue that in that context. Yeah,
That's
I guess
option-
why
option
I guess
F.
ultimately, no, it's option E I'm talking about.
Sorry.
The option ultimately you're going to move to one of these options.
Yeah.
Or one of the other options.
So
what's the benefit of option E relative to option D?
Well, I think option E, as I think Councillor Muntz has touched upon, allows us the possibility of selling or letting the entirety of the Berrymead site in ways that option D and some of the others would not. So we need to balance that. I think the other benefit of option E is that it requires minimal investigation. The facility would be ready built, albeit with some modifications required. So there's less risk from the council's perspective in terms of developing a new facility from scratch. And for that reason, whilst it may come out, at least in the initial figures, as more expensive, it does have potentially less risks attached to it.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I want to express appreciation for this report. I think it's a really beautifully written report. The amount of work that's gone into it is great. It's textbook how you do decision making. The laying out of the options like this is lovely, really lovely. And I think it's also really nice the way that it's been framed up, because the frame of tonight's discussion is not which of these options is preferred. And the frame of the decision that we're asking Cabinet to make is not which of these options are preferred. It's whether we go on and develop some of the options and develop other of the options. And in the future, not the next Cabinet meeting, but in a future Cabinet meeting, there will be decision taken about which option we will go with. And I would expect that will also come back to this committee as well. So there'll be an opportunity to debate each of these options and get into the nitty gritty of it. But that's not what we're being asked to do tonight. So what I would like to know is, of the options that are being left on the table, how are we ensuring that those are sustainable and future-proof for, in light of changing economic circumstance and changing legislation? Because that will be important, that things that are left on the table do have those criteria. The details of each individual one, we could circle on that a lot tonight, and we'll circle on it again in the future. But tonight we need to make sure the options left on the table are viable. So I'm interested in the future-proofing, really.
I think, again, it might be a two-person approach to that answer, but I think the benefit that the warehouse gives, which I think has already been touched upon, is that we can pivot at a later date should we need to. We're trying to approach that option with the benefit of Phil's insight that we now have on the team, to, for example, leave a lot, space for a large roller shutter door for HGV access to be built into the scheme. So if we ever needed to revert that facility for more wider market appeal, we can do so. I think it's very, very difficult to comment on a lot of the other options because they are speculative. We're not talking about specific sites or buildings. And so you've quite rightly identified yourself. This is about trying to, prior to spending, large amounts of cash on each option, trying to put our best foot forward and my sensible foot forward to create that benchmark that we can then guide the other options by the results. So if we explore that warehouse option, it gives us a line in the sand of what it would cost to develop the other site. We can then base that outcome to judge the merits of the other options as more information is developed on those and as other properties come to market. we don't know what's going to come to market in the future. It may be that there aren't any buildings that come to market, and we may decide to change our chosen option based on, you know, a drought of such options coming to market. So at this initial stage, all we can do is put the best information we have available in front of members of ONS and members of Cabinet to try and steer our staffing capacity, but also our financial capacity. And I'm sure Phil has something to add from the estates.
I think the purchase of the freehold or a long leasehold investment is difficult because you don't know what will be on the market, and there is a risk we could compromise what we want because of the timescale we're working to. So I think that is a concern. At the moment, the market reacts quite fast at the moment to industrial properties. There aren't that many investments. You've had a few touted to us recently that might have been suitable, but you need to act very quickly, and I'd be concerned about that. It's interesting that external surveyors have come back and very much said that we're quite right to having an eye on the investment value and flexibility of use if we were to build our own on our own land. And I think that is absolutely key, that council will always have an investment asset there if needed, partly or fully to let, you know, if circumstances change.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on Councillor Muntz's question, because I have now found the appropriate section in the report. So that question was around the value of the land, both in terms of freeing it up completely and partially. So we recognised in the, in fact, it's stated in the report Appendix 1, paragraph 4.3, the disposal of the site as a whole could generate a capital receipt of £500,000 if it was cleared of all buildings and left with a levelled hard standing surface, or 50k per annum as a secure yard. There would be a modest amount of expenditure on the council's behalf to ready the site for that kind of use of 30 to 50k. So that's, I suppose, what you could look at as a return if you chose to progress with option E. Alternatively, if you looked at progressing with option D, then we've identified the current self-contained area with a perimeter fencing as leading to a return of around 12 to 15k per annum. We haven't isolated exactly what could be achieved with the development at the back of the site, but certainly that work would take place. And if you use those two figures as a sort of sliding scale, that should, you know, give an early indication of what kind of numbers we're looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Claydon.
So I just wanted to address Councillor Williams' question around future sustainability. I'm not sure if you meant environmental as sustainability, but that's part of what I think. Was that one part of your question in terms of the future requirements?
It was part of it, but part of it is that I really want to draw attention to the fact that what we're talking about here is what decision professionals call a snaking discussion, right? This is broadly strategically the information going to the decision maker. We're not trying to make a decision, and I think we're going into discussion about specific options and decision that is not ours to make, and it's not to be made tonight. This is, do we recommend that a snaking discussion happens with Cabinet? That's all we're trying to decide here, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. But yes, all of the above.
Helpful, thank you. Just to say that all of the options that involve retrofitting existing buildings, be they the short term, the building itself of existing Berrymead building, leased buildings, or working in partnership building, they are obviously harder to achieve the net zero objectives that we have, and that there's a synergy between the environmental controls that we need for the collection and those objectives. And one of the advantages of the warehousing options is it gives us the ability to zone and control. So we know how much of our collection would benefit from cooling, for example, and limit the space dedicated to cooling. Whereas others, there are going to be other climate controls that are less impactful that we would be able to zone differently in that space. And so that is sort of one of the appeals of the warehousing options. And just on option E, one of the potential advantages of option E is being able to benefit from the cost saving opportunities of developers who are building warehousing at scale, where we can get in early pre-build with our requirements, but take advantage of the fact that they're building many, many more warehouses, whereas we would be looking to build one if we were going to. So there's trade-offs there, but that's why we want to keep both of those options on the table, where returning the best, we want to achieve the long-term solution for this authority, but we want to do so on the best financial footing possible, which is sort of one of the advantages of keeping that option on the table, given that there are viable sites on the district that could become available.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Williams, for the points you've made as well. I think we're not making any decisions tonight, but we are making recommendations. I think we do need to understand what some of the options are in more detail, but I take your point. Councillor Claydon.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, we are being asked to make some recommendations, and some of those are to reject some of these options from further consideration effectively. I know that's not our decision to make either, but we are still giving a recommendation on that. And two of those options that we're being asked to exclude are options A and B. I can certainly see quite readily why we would want to exclude option A, but I think it's less obvious why we would want to reject option B as a possibility out of hand. So I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about why we're being encouraged to recommend option. I'm getting myself in a tangle. Why we're being encouraged to recommend the rejection of option B from further consideration. And just on a small sort of question of clarification, on pages 75 and 76, where options A and B are laid out, under option A, with regard to climate control, it describes the facility as having limited climate control, whereas under option B in paragraph 9.2, it says there would be no environmental stability in terms of temperature and humidity. So just clarification on what the actual position is on the existing buildings. And yet again, why do we want to get rid of option B? Because it does seem somewhat viable, at least.
And then pass to you. I think one of the reasons is the accreditation issue. The shortcomings of the building were identified as part of the conversations with the prior accreditation process that we engaged in. The Arts Council it attempts to be supportive in its accreditation process. It doesn't police in a sort of punitive way, though we are very aware that authorities have had their accreditation removed, and that they do use those powers. But our accreditation was granted on the basis that we were going to be addressing substantively the storage issues, which we have not yet done, which I think is sort of a primary factor. I think the secondary issue that I'm concerned about is that there are long-term impacts on the collection. We've obviously got the roof leaking and things like that, which has a very real and immediate sort of impact on the collection. But we do have items in there like rare insects, papers, things like that, which are all being stored in sort of the right types of archival boxes and things like that. But the climate control facilities that are there are not sort of ideal for that. And if you look at the storage space concerns in there, it is very hard for our curators to be checking in every corner, every box, every sort of thing, to be making sure that we're upholding sort of those responsibilities. And I think each prior administration has made that same sort of view that you're making for like the last 30 years on what to do. And I think the accreditation issue is really starting to sort of limit the sort of viability of that option in the longer term. Rob, do you want to add any additional comments there?
Thank you. I think you've covered a lot there, Councillor Thomas, but just to add on the discrepancy, I think you're right to pick it up. The truth of the matter is that there is central heating in the building. So it's in the eye of the beholder to a certain extent as to whether you would quantify that as environmental control. But I take your point that there is a little bit of a discrepancy there. But beyond the central heating, we don't really have many levers to pull if the building is becoming too humid too dry, various things like that. And of course, in an ideal world, would be able to zone that according to where certain artifacts were stored. I think the big issue with option B comes down to the size. The primary building is 470 square meters. I think you'll see in the paper that we ideally really need about 650 square meters of space for our museum collection, and that is resulting in overspill into other council facilities. Now, there's a wider conversation to be had about when and how quickly we might be able to put those to any sort of alternative use, but certainly you could be forgiven for saying there's a bit of a logjam because of this situation, and the way that we need to free that up is by essentially, in officers' eyes, looking at option C as, you know, option B, but in improving the space. It's not going to solve the storage conditions, which we believe are having a detrimental impact on our collection. But if we were to opt for option B, we're not solving the overall space requirement issue, and that issue will remain and will affect other projects.
Thank you. I just want to come in on that. Option C is presented as a short-term option. Is that because we'll run out of space, or because the items that are still kind of remaining within Berrymead deteriorate so that accreditation goes at risk again? Why is it a short-term?
I think it is seen as a short-term option for the reason you've mentioned there, in terms of it's not an ideal setting for museum objects. You know, members would note the appendices that already detail some of the damage and deterioration that's being inflicted upon our collection by substandard storage conditions. We'd very much like to address those in the museum sector. Appreciate obviously the wider financial implications of the council of doing that. But I think the other point I would raise is that you might note that some of the museum collection is currently being stored at the former Letchworth Museum. That building, because of the nature of its build, actually has a stable enough environment to store some objects, whereas if we were to move to, for instance, the Unit 3 option, which is a mezzanine floor in essentially a warehouse, that is going to have more fluctuations in terms of its environmental quality. So even though you are answering the space problem, you're still not going to lead to those objects being stored in ideal environments. And if anything, they might end up deteriorating more. So option C is around solving space, but not solving the preservation of our objects. And the question needs to be asked as to whether we prioritize that in line with other priorities.
Thank you. On the loss of accreditation risk, has any scenario modelling been done on that? So one of the questions I put to you earlier, but what does that look like? What's the impact of it?
Yes, so I know this was one of your previous questions that you asked in advance of the session. The modelling is difficult to do for the reasons that Councillor Thomas touched upon already, because the Arts Council are not in the habit of policing the sector. Instead, they would look to support the sector. But if no improvement is made, if we're, you know, we are ultimately custodians of these objects, and both people and organisations such as the Lottery Fund would have expected that we'd maintain those standards when they invested the 1 million towards the museum project back in 2015 to 2019, for example. So there's a PR issue and there's a trust issue with those organisations we rely upon as a museum service for grants and things like that. But in terms of the consequences once accreditation, if it were to be stripped or we were to be unsuccessful in applying for it again, there's really 4 key points that I would raise. The first is around the staffing, recruitment and retention. You can imagine if you're a museum professional and on your watch your museum loses accreditation, that's not a good thing to really have on your CV. So there'll be a question for those staff that we have and very much value, but also in terms of how widely we are attracting talent in the sector in any future recruitment. There's also the issue around grants, because the vast majority of grants are only accessible to museums if they have accreditation. It's not entirely, but I would say, you know, high 90%. The third issue is around the kind of the PR fallout that it has. around reputation of the sector and things like that. And the fourth is around the fact that we would fail to attract the travelling exhibitions that the North Herts Museum has been, built in part to host. The idea behind that was to host travelling exhibitions of higher quality than the district had previously been able to host. Rembrandt exhibition we've had previously as one example. So you have to be accredited and you have to meet certain standards and be able to demonstrate that you're responsible custodians of museum objects to be able to secure those kinds of exhibitions. So we need to ask ourselves the question of whether we are happy to relinquish that accreditation. Oh, I also add, sorry, just to go on, the exhibitions, as Councillor Thomas has already mentioned, has a big impact on our footfall. So we know that when we don't have an exhibition in place of the sort of these travelling exhibitions, our footfall more or less drops by a third. That has a knock-on impact on our cafe income, our shop income, but also the wider social benefits and the reach of our audience we're able to achieve.
Thank you. That's exactly the sort of information I was interested in. We talked a lot earlier on about KPIs and economic performance, but also social value KPIs as well. I think in making an argument to make this investment, I think it's important that we lay those the consequences of the alternatives out. And Councillor Thomas, did you want to come in?
Highlight that there is a sort of fairly prominent example of a museum that de-acceded an item via sale in contravention of accreditation terms to raise £16 million to invest into its museum service. It took them over a decade to get their accreditation back. Once you lose it, there's no being cute with it, essentially, because it's obviously not a practice that the Arts Council wants to in any way encourage. They don't want museums across the country raiding the banks to find that £16 million. I've asked, we don't have one, just to be really, really clear. But even where you could potentially see a tactical, strategic objective, being achieved, that museum will have effectively cut itself off from over a decade's worth of funding and grant funding, in order to sort of achieve that moment. So I think it's also sort of recognizing that once lost, it's very hard to, it's a real process to get it back again if that's a sort of future decision that gets made.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, thank you, Rob, for another really thorough report on this. I think you picked up on the feedback from the previous time this was considered internally and have really built the options out with a lot more detail. I want to take us back just to option H and some of the comments that Councillor Tyson made at the start. And I was just querying a couple of points around the partnership options that have been explored. Obviously, I note the Managing Director has had conversations with other councils within Hertfordshire, but have we also sort of looked more broadly, done an assessment of what solutions other local authority museums across the country or sort of similar examples in other places might have considered to try and deal with this sort of wicked issue, because we can't be the only place that's facing these challenges. And then also, have we reflected on possible co-funding solutions, bearing in mind there are a number of academic institutions which value parts of the collection that we've got, and we do have some universities and indeed some other quite large museum institutions down the A1 in London that value our collections as well. So query if there's potential contributions towards the options that could be obtained by exploring and exploiting those partnerships further. And then also reflecting on, are there any perhaps insurance risks of splitting the collection if we were able to locate sort of partnered satellite storage facilities outside of the district, maybe working with other council authorities as well, depending on what plans they're exploring. So it's just a little bit more detail maybe around the rigours and the options that sit within that partnership option element.
Thank you very much, and some really interesting questions there, and I'll take them one by one. Thank you for your thanks on the report, but could I just take the opportunity to acknowledge other staff members' contribution to the report? whilst I'm here representing the service, as you can imagine with such a wide-ranging report, there's been a lot of contribution from many members of the team, and I just wanted to acknowledge that they've put in an awful lot of effort as well. It's not just myself. With regards to option H and the partnership options explored, as Councillor Thomas has mentioned, we have reached out at a senior level to other local authorities and other comparable sized museums. The typical stumbling block that we come across is that all museums ideally want their storage on their doorstep. Storage is obviously not ideally seen anyway as somewhere where you put your items away and never see the light of day again. We would want to make sure that if we are investing any considerable sum of money in this, that we also grasp the outreach benefits it can deliver, which I think is referenced in the report, but things like behind the scenes tours, opportunities to get hands-on with the collection. After all, what you see in the museum is only the tip of the iceberg. People do have a great level of interest in certain niche elements of the collection, and we want to be able to facilitate that and give people access to their own heritage, of course. So those are the kind of opportunities we want to provide. And looking at an option outside of the district, let alone outside of Hertfordshire, would obviously more or less give up those opportunities. So we haven't explored them. Those are the reasons why it's up for debate as to whether we should on that basis. But happy to obviously look again at that if that's members' wishes. In terms of the supportive institutions and whether we've looked to explore whether they could potentially contribute to such a project, we haven't. We have explored what grant funding offerings are out there. I would imagine that if the team that worked closely with those institutions felt that was a likely possibility, that they would have mentioned it during the course of the investigations behind this report. But I'll certainly take that away and ask the team and explore those opportunities if we feel there's any merit in doing so, or certainly I can provide a response if we decide there isn't as to why that might be the case, because I think it's a very well-reasoned question to ask. In terms of the insurance risks, I'll answer more broadly in terms of insurance risks first. I'm not exactly certain what you mean about outside the district in that point, but firstly around insurance is a bit of a difficult thing when it comes to museum collections, because of course, what are you insuring against? If you're insuring against the monetary value, there's obviously an argument that can be made for that, but most of these items can't be replaced. And the value is not necessarily in the monetary value, but in its loss to the cultural heritage of an area or to an individual that it helps to interpret the life story of. So we do have kind of an ongoing internal discussion with finance about the merits of insuring, to what level, whether we need to insure, because how would we replace it anyway, those kind of things. But perhaps could I prompt you to expand on your question around the outside the district element?
Sure, absolutely. So it was just sort of thinking about, obviously, the more items you have, the more different locations they're in, the greater the risk that there is of some sort of harm coming to them. If you've got them having to travel transportation distances, I'm thinking, perhaps the arrangements the British Library has with certain texts that are held in York and then have to be loaned out around the country. But I think there's that wider question, isn't there, around, is this a collection that has an agreed value? Is it something that we've even bothered to insure at this point in time? Is it worthwhile insuring, et cetera, et cetera? I was just trying to ensure that we've covered off all of the potential financial costs and relevant considerations when we're looking at options.
So we certainly do insure the collection, but I guess my point, as already mentioned, is that it's not necessarily just the monetary value, and the protection that insurance gives does not necessarily work in a museum collection context, as it would typically with other sort of insurances. In terms of diversifying where the collection's held, then you could argue you're insuring more buildings, but I suppose equally, the chance of one of those coming to harm means that the others would likely be protected, rather than having all of your assets under one roof, so to speak. So I don't think I'm in a position to comment more broadly on the insurance and the risk sections. The council has a risk an insurance officer that can advise on that. So perhaps I could take that one away and provide you with a more comprehensive answer.
Okay, thank you. Just going to come in on the question you asked about partners, and because Councillor Thomas in her introduction talked about outreach to major funders, but you don't think you said what they actually said in response. Are you able to provide any details on that? Because from the report, it sounds like grant funding or support funding is possible but unlikely. This was my interpretation. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there are, I mean, I think everyone in this room knows the state of arts and heritage funding in the United Kingdom. Currently, it's not in a great space, and that's obviously something that we would hope to see change, but I think we need to be pragmatic about that. The Arts Council is the principal funder in this space. There is a specific fund for projects like this. It is hyper competitive, and as Councillor Dennis commented, these challenges are felt the country over. And so we have actually applied in the past for grant funding to help with that. We're not precluded from applying again, and obviously the team would want to be exploring those options. As a local authority, there's a really limited range of sort of grant funders that we can look to. There are speculative options around sort of appointing a fundraising officer, look at private giving, private donations. But for museums of our type, where they are, that might be a great way of raising funds to complement specific small scale projects, but not like the sort of large scale capital type projects that we are considering. I know that Rob, you led the work with officers around reaching out to the arts funders. Do you want to feedback sort of the additional feedback?
Yes, thank you. So I think it's important to say that there are a great deal of grant funding organisations out there, but few would contribute funding to a project such as this, and even fewer would contribute a sum, large enough to potentially make a material difference to the values that we're looking at here. The one that holds promise potentially in terms of unlocking this project, if financial constraints mean that we can't move forward without it, would be the Lottery Heritage Fund. We've engaged with that fund, and ultimately the general feedback is that we really need to, so to speak, back a horse. They want a fully planned out project where we are clear on what we are investing in, what we are seeking their support with. And obviously at this stage, we have an options appraisal. We haven't fully scoped that out. We are not in a position to be competitive through that funding round. We are able to apply for that fund every few months, well, every 3 months to be precise. And we last did so about a month and a half ago, but that's the feedback that's come from that initial conversation that I'm sharing with you now, is that they really need the options whittled down. They can't invest in a project that may be a new build or maybe a purchase of a freehold. I think the other key point to make on that particular grant fund is that it must be for a freehold option or a long lease in excess of 100 years. So that does strike out some of the options if we want to go for that major grant. There are certainly ways that we can support smaller elements of the move for the project. So for instance, once we get into the nitty-gritty of any project, we might be able to fund, for instance, a support officer to do a certain piece of work on cataloguing objects. But again, as I referenced earlier, it's not really going to make a material difference to the sums we're exploring at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I do just have 2 questions. The first one relates to net zero. So, and specifically relating to option D. So if we have the building constructed with everything that we want, so the rolling door up to sort of net zero compliant, am I right in thinking that that is going to cost us nearly £1 million for it to be net zero compliant, for it to be carbon neutral?
Sorry, I wasn't sure whether you're going to go on to your second question. So yes,
No.
Come back on that first one. That's the figure that's been presented to us through that proposal. I think the fact that we have since looked at the warehouse proposal and found that the figure is strikingly different suggests that there's obviously more investigation to do there. We're aware that we need to sharpen our pencil on those figures, and for that reason we have tried to piggyback recently on the council's wider decarbonisation project by speaking to Wilmot Dixon as the company on that, to give us some more confidence, I would say, in the figures around net zero. I think with regards to the proposal over the bespoke facility, part of the reason why that project has not moved forward in earnest is because those figures do seem to be quite inflated. We obviously, well, not obviously, if we wanted to get to the next stage with that project, there was a suggestion that we would need to spend many hundreds of thousands of pounds and commit to a certain level of the project moving forward in order to establish whether there are any cost savings there. We do think that building is over-spec'd in terms of their proposal, but certainly there are doubts over whether that funding, that figure should be as high as that, and the prospect of spending hundreds of thousands of pounds to find out was obviously something that we wanted to think twice about.
Because, I mean, obviously, you know, if you were to go with that, it's going to be over £5 million, and that's not an insubstantial amount of money. I mean, you know, we're talking about 4 million as a baseline. But then sort of going back to option E, am I right in thinking that if you were to go with option E, it would also potentially free up or empty the former Letchworth Museum of all of the sort of storage of which is currently stored there, and therefore that you potentially could get a capital receipt or an income, revenue generating income from that?
Yes, so to be clear, option C onwards are all designed to free up Letchworth Museum, or the former Letchworth Museum, I should probably say.
And so I'm going to ask my question on Letchworth Museum now. Do you have a rough estimate for the potential value of that, either in a sale or lettings scenario? I think it is an important part of the business case for this.
Yeah, no, I don't have that. I've recently inspected it. The council owns the freehold of the library next door as well, and North Herts, sorry, not the Hertfordshire County, obviously, of the library have occupation rights on that. We've got to have further discussions with them about their long-term plan for the library, I think. There's much more work to do before we've got an idea of what options might be there for a capital receipt or let. So
Any idea of a lower
bound
bound figure? Or?
Any idea?
Yeah.
I really can't give you
Okay,
an off the
all
figure.
right.
But all I would say is a substantial building of architectural presence in the
Okay,
town.
thank you.
So I would expect it to be a significant value. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you. That's you. Okay, Councillor Wright.
Can I just add my compliments to the team on the quality of the paper? I think it's really an impressive document. I think probably Rob has maybe answered my question since I put my light on. My question was really about option F and why it wasn't preferred. Because at first reading, to me, it seemed as though it was quite a viable option, particularly as you talk about there being a dilapidated building that may be available and could be refurbished. But I think probably, Rob, you mentioned the thing about the 100-year lease, and less than that would prohibit us from applying for a grant. So is that the main reason why option F isn't preferred?
So there's a few reasons to my mind why option F would not be preferred. But I think the reason that we haven't wholeheartedly suggested that it's discounted necessarily is because there's really no cost incurred by keeping it on the table. And if the storage conditions were to suddenly degrade further, not that we're expecting that to happen, it helps to kind of have a watching brief on what might be available if we need a really short-term solution that we could potentially move into. But you're right to touch upon the grant. That obviously the grant possibility doesn't mean anything as a non-starter. There's a decision to be made there as to whether the council proceeds with an option where that level of grant support is not available. You know, we can choose to walk that path. But the other point I would raise around option F is that being leasehold or rental, it's temporary in its nature. Our museum collection, one would hope, is not. And therefore, as we reach the end of that lease, and whilst that may not be a problem for the next couple of generations, it will become a problem. You know, do we want to be looking at a solution where we see our museum collection storage needs as finite? You know, this is hopefully a permanent need to preserve our ongoing collection, as Tamsin has referenced, Councillor Thomas has referenced, and therefore a leasehold, whilst it may kind of appear favourable in some senses, I think it doesn't really solve the problem permanently. But we don't want to take it off the table entirely. That said.
Yeah, Councillor Thomas.
Add for clarity as well, the net annual revenue figure is calculated using a standard 40-year period. I think when we took occupation of the current Berrymead window factory as was, it was already approaching sort of the predicted end of its life at that point. And so I just think we're also just really conscious that with any of these options, we've provided the costing on the standard 40 years terms. That's good practice for projects of the scales, but the just an additional detail point, I guess, to the point that Rob's already made, is that in our minds, we are hoping that what gets built will outlive that. Now, for our planning purposes, we're planning on that basis of the 40 years. But for whoever is sat in these seats in 40 years' time, it would be good to know they've got a building that if they need to kick it down the road a bit longer, if they need to keep it going, they've got that option, which obviously when you then compare across the net annual revenue of the freehold options, that's a real added advantage with a particularly long-term view of things. But I think it adds to the case on the freehold options.
Thank you. I was going to just turn to option, well, C and G, I suppose. The buildings that are ruled out in option G, is there any value in looking at those as short-term options? Because I note that option C is actually a building the council owns as well. So there's a bit of a blurring of the line between C and G, I think. And you mentioned that it wouldn't really provide the right climate controls or anything like that. So yeah, is there any reason? And I'm thinking in particular Thomas Bellamy House that we heard was empty earlier on, and I understand is very close to the museum. Yeah, could you just speak to that decision or that recommendation?
So I think I'm right in saying that Thomas Bellamy House would not be large enough to accommodate the entirety of the collection, first and foremost. But I think there's another piece here around the fragility of our collection. So best practice would be to move the collection as little as possible. Obviously, opening a box and showing someone what's inside it and having sort of tours is one thing. Packing it all onto a van and driving it across the district raises the potential for damage. And we are talking about, very historic, fragile, very, sensitive items here. So yes, there could be the option to look at it as a short-term solution from the perspective of giving the collection a home. But the more movements of the collection you invites the more risk for damage to take place and greater damage to the collection ultimately. So I would want to kind of on behalf of the museum team, I can feel screaming in my ear, limit the amount of movement of the collection as much as possible. We don't want to be looking at sort of a stepping stone approach to this. We ideally want a long-term solution or somewhere that minimizes the amount of moves of the collection as much as possible, because that can't be understated in terms of protecting it.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'm interested in why we should incur capital cost if we've got a building that has sufficient space for the short-term option. But that's fine. You would still
square footage. I've got the square footage on me.
It's in the report. It's larger than what you see.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
According to the report, whether that's right or not, I don't know.
I'll have a look. Yeah.
And it might not be as usable because
it may not be. Yeah, exactly. That's suitable. We can take that back.
I think it should be looked at.
Suitability, I think, is the key thing, isn't it? It's staircase. There's no lift in there.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Yeah. May not. Yeah. The listed status of it is heritage building. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And then just also on option G, the potentially more long term, the industrial properties in Royston. These sound from the brief mention they get in the report like exactly the type of building that you would be looking for under option E or option F. What kind of lease are they on, and have any of the leaseholders been approached? Because I'd hope that it wasn't just ruled out on grounds of convenience, which is what's suggested in the report.
question again? I missed the beginning.
Yeah, so it's, option G, Appendix 8.
Yep.
The industrial properties in Royston.
Yep.
They sound very much like the type of property that you'd be looking for in option E and F, and they're already under council ownership. How viable would it be to, get hold of one of those? Have any of the leaseholders been approached?
Yeah, no, they've not been approached, because I think until we've got this in principle decision, we wouldn't know whether we'd want to acquire something rather than build our own. It would be very similar to the option of buying a long leasehold, because essentially they're all on long leaseholds. So there'd be a significant capital payment to buy someone out if they wanted to sell as well. Now, at the moment, I think they're all established businesses. A number of them got under tenants. So I'm not aware of anything being available or likely to be available. I think it's premature if I was to approach them very speculatively at the moment. So I think that's why. But essentially, those properties would fall into the grouping of acquiring a new freehold or long leasehold.
Sure. So do you know how long those leases are?
Yeah, I'd have them all on my schedule, but I mean, a lot of them are sort of 50 years plus still to run.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and Thomas Bellamy. Sorry.
Yes.
Yes, just on Thomas Bellamy, could I just query the comment around the size? Because Appendix 1, paragraph 14.4 quotes Thomas Bellamy House as being 328 square meters. So what document are you referring to?
I was referring to the, not as a complete solution, but referring to the square meterage that was available from Unit 3 mezzanine.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a short-term relief rather than a long-term solution.
Sorry,
that
I
we're talking about.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'd still need to keep Berrymead kind of in that
Yes.
scenario.
Yeah. Instead of using Unit 3. Okay.
Yeah.
I take that point. I'll take it away and perhaps respond in time.
Okay. Councillor Claydon.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to just pick up on the financial implications of each of the options, and it's great to have all the numbers here side by side. So thanks for that. Councillor Thomas has mentioned that costs are amortized over a 40-year period, which is standard, but presumably that doesn't apply to the shorter term options where the costs will be only presumably over the time for which they're valid. So I just wondered if you could clarify what time period these costs are expected to be incurred under, because that is something that varies between the options, I think. And are they, I must admit, I don't know how capital financing calculations are worked out, but are they sensitive to future borrowing cost variation?
So firstly, just to mention the figures without further investment in exploring the options will only be best estimates for now, and they are, of course, subject to change. In terms of the time periods that each option is predicted over, if we were to look at, for example, options B and C, that impact on the revenue lines is spread over 10 years. That's a kind of line in the sand as to how long we expect to use those assets for. Completely take on board, I think, Councillor Barnes' earlier point in that if we were to put a mezzanine floor in at Unit 3, it would likely last a longer period than that. But in terms of the usable life for protecting the museum collection, that is only seen as 10 years because of the damage it potentially poses. The other options are spread over 40 years. Now, ideally, I'd be able to refer to someone in finance about the long-term financing of this. So with respect, I'd prefer to come back to you over that. But my sense is that we use a general calculation over how much it will cost to borrow the funding over that time. And of course, even if we were to fund it from existing reserves, those existing reserves would still accrue interest in savings accounts and things like that. So despite how we might fund it, it still is subject to the interest payments. But I can provide, a more substantial answer on that if I speak to finance colleagues, and we can circulate that if you so wish.
I think, yeah, I mean, it might be instructive. I think it's just, we're not only thinking about the difference in cost, which is substantial clearly between the different options, but also how long we're committing the council to paying them back those costs over what is potentially a very long time in the future, right? So the difference between we need to pay X amount for the next 10 years versus we need to pay for the next 40 seems to me like something that matters. That's all. But whether it's worth doing those calculations when we're at this relatively early stage, I accept, maybe it's not necessary. And Ian may be rolling his eyes behind me that I'm getting it all mingled up.
Yeah, I mean that's right in principle, because clearly what we've estimated here is at around a 5% interest, which is what it is at the moment. One hopes that will fall, and but equally the other side to that, course, is as those rates fall, so does our income from investments fall. So there's a number of issues that all have to be worked in together. But yeah, I mean, in principle, that some of the cost there for that 40-year period may actually end up being rather less, but I think it's right to take where we are now, which is a 5% interest rate, which is what the Public Works Loan Board currently is. But that is, I suspect, likely to fall over the course of coming months.
Thank you. That's Robert. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Tyson?
Yeah, I just did want to return to the option H, specifically the Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation element of that. I noticed that there's a forecast revenue impact of that, but that is based presumably on very uncertain financial basis, isn't it? I guess because we know so little about it at the moment. Obviously, there's advantages with that as a potential option, and according to the report, officers have expressed an interest in following that up in more detail, and it would come with the same benefits of revenue from Berry Lane and the Letchworth Museum as some of the other options. So I think that's what I really wanted to reinforce. I think that's an option that needs to be looked into in detail. Question is, yeah, what was that revenue impact based on? And have we got sorry, what have we got a floor space in mind for that?
Yes. So in terms of in terms of what the net revenue impact was based upon, it's based on very, very initial conversations with Letchworth Heritage Foundation counterparts, and absolutely, you're right to say that they should be taken with a huge dose of caution at this stage. I think of all the options, that's the one we have the most uncertainty on, but it's the option that, if it can be proved to be workable, might have benefits that would be unique to it over and above some of the other options. I think in terms of the way in which that building can be reconfigured, it's not really for us as the council to say. As I said, we're not in the driving seat for that building, but my understanding is that there would be a potential for 3 floors in the building, of which the council could look to secure enough space across some of those floors to fulfill the space requirements we have. I think there was a third question in there, and forgive me, I
don't think there was, actually. It was the floor space and the revenue impact. Yeah,
I'm sure there was a third question I had on the tip of my tongue, but maybe it'll come to me. But I'll...
about the Berry Lane and Letchworth Museum benefits of freeing up those sites.
Oh, yeah, I think the only other point I was going to raise...
Berry Mead, sorry.
I think the only other point I was going to raise is that in order to understand whether it becomes a competitive option, if you like, financially, we need to obviously have something to compare it against, which is all the more reason why we want to really get to the bottom of exactly what we can do on the current Berrymead site. That funding, whilst we're spending on that option, and I appreciate there's a risk if we don't move forward that is unfunded revenue rather than capital. But it will give us a line in the sand to compare all the other options to. If we don't move in that direction, we wouldn't know whether Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation are offering us a more preferable deal or not in terms of what the eventual agreement might be. And of course, we do have the benefit, if it hasn't been picked up in the paper already, that by at least getting drawings put together for that site, even if we don't move forward, that's not entirely lost investment, because it will enhance the value of that site potentially.
Okay. I'm just going to ask one final question before we move to the recommendations, which is just on the Ash proposal. In terms of the status of that, and whether you're asking us to, consider that or provide any view on that this evening, or whether that's something that we'd do, that would come at a later point. Because I'm looking to the context is I'm looking to amend 2.2 to make it more specific to the warehouse proposal. Do we?
Yeah, I think we've left it in there as a benchmark on the sort of the redevelopment of a the work was done. Number one, we've got the proposal, but it was there to provide a benchmark. I believe that our preference, for the reasons that both Phil and Rob articulated earlier, is that the warehousing option off on the site offers other securities and other options. Also, the other thing is that if we do sort of move away from the Berrymead site, we look at options elsewhere in the district, anywhere else in the district. We've actually also done some of the work to start moving forward with the future life of Berrymead in a different function with that option. Rob and Phil, did I speak correctly? Great.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add, only to say that the Ash proposal is based on a costings that are submitted to the SCAPE framework, a procurement framework, and that dates to a time where we just didn't have estates resource to advise on any other way, which is why we were so reliant on a framework at that stage. We haven't kind of turned around to Ash and said we aren't interested. That proposal is still there, and it's certainly a good benchmark to have, especially if costs start to rise on the portal framed option, the warehouse option. But as Phil has said, we've spoken to 3 different contacts in that sector, which has given us a good degree of confidence. And we think it's certainly worth pursuing, because at least in terms of the initial stages, the Ash proposal seemed very front loaded, in that we had to commit a vast amount of funding to get, to a stage whether we knew what the costs were, whereas this way it seems a much more sensible route forward and seems to be lower cost, at least at this early stage.
Thank you. Okay. I can't see any more questions. So I'm going to move to recommendations. Acknowledging that I'm going to look to amend them. What's the best procedural way to do that? Is it best to propose them as amended now, or? Yeah. Yeah. See if we can get a second. Okay. I will do that. I will do that then. And I suspect there's also going to be interest in voting on these individually as well. So we can talk about that in the debate. Okay, so what I'd like to propose is that we take them as read, but on 2.2 we amend to say that Cabinet approved the use of £30,000 from the allocated £4 million budget. And then after option D, we put warehouse proposal in brackets, just to make that one clear. On 2.3, that Cabinet approved the use of £20,000 from the allocated £4 million budget. That's those numbers correct? Okay. And then I think also on 2.6, it would be worth us considering each of these options individually, because they are quite different. And also, in order for the vote to kind of give a steer on those options, I would look to amend that to say that Cabinet resolves that options, so 2.6.1 would be option C should be pursued further, 2.6.2 option F, and 2.6.3 option H. I have a seconder for that. Councillor Winchester. Okay. Okay, so we'll move. Did you get that all there? So basically slightly tightening up 2.2 and 2.3, and then just splitting out 2.6. C, F, and H, which are the options that aren't mentioned above. Okay. All right, cool. Is there any debate? No, you going for it, John? Or? Okay.
I'm dithering slightly. I'm also slightly unclear whether we're voting on each of the recommendations individually, which I think I would be.
I think we should.
I think we should too.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we should vote on the recommendations individually. That's the first thing. I have some concerns about option E because it seems that there's a lot of moving parts involved, and because we're being asked to recommend the approval of spending some money up front on that. I wonder whether that's a good idea given the fact that option E relies on availability for property. We've heard that the market is perhaps unpredictable. I recognize that maybe the perfect things comes up and it's great to be able to move quickly in that context, but I worry whether that's sufficiently likely to justify the upfront cost involved in that process. And because it also means that we then have to consider what to do with the existing site, in addition to moving everything to the new site, and whether that, in what form that should be disposed of or whether it should be kept and used for other purposes. It seems like there's a lot going on there. So I'm inclined to suggest that we do recommend the spending of the money up front to explore option D, because I think it would be good to have a clear idea of what a truly suitable structure designed for the purpose that we want it to be used would look like. And it seems to me the best way to do that is to make use of the site that we already have, and so that there are fewer unknowns and it's an easier concept, and it's easier to see how we get from where we currently are to where we want to be. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clayton.
Sorry, Chair. We had just a little confab over that query. Just to make it perfectly clear, the 20k, whilst we're asking for it to be identified for this purpose, it would only actually be spent if a likely prospect were to come to market. So if that were not to happen, that budget would remain unspent. So I just wanted to clarify that, and sorry if that wasn't clear.
Okay. So we've got into a debate here, which my understanding was that the 20k was to develop proposals so that if a site becomes available, that you're able to move quickly in exploiting it.
So the 20k, and apologies once again if it wasn't clear, I can understand the misunderstanding, but it's for things like the conveyancing, initial investigations over a potential prospect, so that we can then take that through the committee cycle. Otherwise, you can imagine a position where a likely prospect comes to market, we'd need to wait until the next committee cycle to unlock the funding to then start on the conveyancing, only to then return to the committee cycle. So it's about being able to strike quickly, or as quickly as we can, obviously coming back for appropriate sign off from the committee process. But if no likely prospect comes up, we wouldn't obviously part with that funding. So there is a risk, absolutely, that we undertake the conveyancing or whatever other services are required, only to find that there are problems with that property and it's not as likely a prospect as we first thought. But it's not a dead certainty that we would be spending that 20k just because the approval is given for the budget to be allocated.
Any further debate? No. Okay. Fine. I think then let's move to the vote, and we will go through in order as we said. Are you okay with what we're voting on, James?
Yeah, if I can just clarify your 2.6.
Yeah. So 2.6.1.
Yeah.
The Cabinet resolves that option C should be pursued further.
Yep.
Yeah, and then copy and paste that for option F and H.
Okay, so you're going for all
Yeah.
three. Okay, yeah. So you're getting rid of the which should be discounted bit of 2.6.
Yes, that's right.
Yep, thank you. And then, yeah, do you want me just to read out what I've got for 2.2 and 2, or do you want me
Yeah, if you can.
or do you want to do that?
I can do that.
2.2.
Yeah, I'll
can
do that at 2.2. Yeah, let's do
first if you want,
2.1 first. Okay, 2.1 first. So the recommendations are that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommend to Cabinet 2.1 that Cabinet note the current projected costs, advantages and disadvantages of each option. Go to the vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay. Okay. Then 2.2.
So I've got the Cabinet approved the use of £30,000 of the allocated £4 million budget in the current capital programme for this project to develop more detail on the costs of option D, brackets, warehouse proposal, close brackets, and to acquire the necessary details for a planning application to be made. So,
yeah, that's correct. Yeah, wait to vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
And then yet 2.3, you've got Cabinet approved the use of £20,000 from the allocated £4 million budget in the current capital programme for this project to be developed to develop more detail on the costs of option E, brackets, purchase of a freehold/long leasehold building, new or existing, close brackets, should a suitable property become available.
Chair, that motion is carried.
And 2.4 is unamended that Cabinet consider and give approval for officers to apply for grant funding towards the investigations mentioned in 2.2 and 2.3 and recognise the need to align investigations with grant funding timetables in this instance.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. 2.5 that Cabinet resolve to discount options A, B and G and recommend that they are no longer developed or explored further.
Chair, that motion is carried.
And then 2.6.1 Cabinet resolves that option C should be pursued further.
Chair, that motion is carried.
2.6.2 Cabinet resolves that option F should be pursued further.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay, and finally 2.6.3 Cabinet resolves that option H should be pursued further.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you very much for all of your efforts both this evening and leading up to it as well. Very, very much appreciated. We're going to move on to the next item now. But yeah, have a good night. Almost left there. Okay. Item that I think we're just going to crack on, even though it's late, isn't it? Item 13, task and finish group on section 106 contributions, draft scoping document. Jeevan Mann to present.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ralph Munsett very kindly raised a request to conduct scope for task and finish group to investigate the Section 106 funding of North Herts, including addressing concerns whether the Section 106 funding is effective in providing community and social infrastructure for existing and new developments within North Herts, or whether another mechanism such as CIL would deliver better outcomes for communities in North Herts prior to the adoption of the local plan. The corresponding report and scoping document have been drafted following conversations with Councillor Munser, and is at Appendix A. Councillor Munser has further refined the scope, which hasn't been included in the report, and I'll pass over to him so that he can address any changes.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. And thank you to you, Jeevan, for all of your work on this, and for obviously sort of working in very, very tight timeframes. I'm very, very pleased to be able to present this to ONS tonight. It's a issue that as we look to implement the local policies of the local plan, it's important that obviously communities are able to have appropriate infrastructure in place in order to support that development and mitigate the negative impacts of that development. And it's certainly a concern of which has been identified that Section 106 funding and the regime of which currently exists in North Hertfordshire isn't necessarily delivering those benefits of which residents ought to see from developments of which are brought forward. The key changes just to the investigation of scope, and obviously I welcome any comments and I'm more than happy to answer any questions on this, but particularly when we're focusing on issues/concerns with the current mechanism, it's looking at the limited specific community benefit, just to sort of outline what I mean by that. For example, if there is a development of which takes place in Codicott, for example, it is, I would argue, only right that a large proportion of that fund, of the Section 106 funding of which is gained from that development, is actually spent in Codicott, because it's no use it being spent in Royston, for example, of where it's not going to have any impact on the residents of whom are going to be impacted by the development itself and who are going to face those impacts. And just sort of expanding the scope as well is particularly sort of just adding another key line of inquiry, and it's looking at whether or not should the Section 106 funding system continue in North Hertfordshire, or should it be reformed. It's trying to sort of culminate all of what the Task and Finish group will have gleaned, the information of which will have been learned, and making a recommendation to ONS, to Cabinet, to the Council about whether or not the regime is right, or as I said, whether or not we should be looking to reform it and replace it with something else. Just regarding sort of indicators of success, because it's really important we have KPIs. One of the indicators is members are better informed of the current Section 106 mechanism and have a clear understanding of the associated process for allocation and decision making. Another one will be that members ascertain if the mechanism is most effective in delivering community infrastructure, and if not, alternatives have been investigated and proposed which will deliver better outcomes for residents. And linking back to the point of which I raised earlier, more Section 106 spending/investment is in communities directly impacted by the development where a Section 106 agreement is in force. Unless anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to present this report and pass it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. Does anyone have any questions on this? Councillor Dennis.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check and clarify, as well as obviously looking at the Section 106 contributions, which this council looks after and has stewardship of, and ought to be spending in a timely manner. Will the Task and Finish group also consider the Section 106 contributions that our sites have made to the county council, and whether or not those contributions are being used as they were intended from the agreements?
Thank you, Councillor Dennis, for that question. And I think it's a really important point that you raise, because, of course, we are just one of the authorities that is able to benefit from Section 106 funding. If you look on page 138, the potential witnesses and contributors, Hertfordshire County Council is just one of those stakeholders, particularly relating to education and highways, but not limited to. As we know, highways and education are generally the two biggest requests when it comes to Section 106 funding. But equally as well, it's looking working with local stakeholders such as the NHS, making sure we actually have, for example, primary care provision and local GP provision. And I know that's something which residents in Codicott have raised with me, and I know it's something that across the district more wider is a concern to those of whom are going to be seeing development in their communities. But I'm more than happy to answer any follow-ups.
Councillor Wright-Mason.
I'm a big fan of, so I was very keen on this being put forward in the first place. So thank you for all the hard work, especially Councillor Munster. Appreciate it. An extra. I'm just going to ask. Obviously, it could be included in the scope. But I think a big thing for me is about a communication with the residents about how Section 106 money is spent. And I think in terms of like what capacity this task and finish group might have, I think that might be something a bit more achievable. Obviously, it's probably an easier fix than some of these very expansive sort of plans. But so just, I suppose the question is, how much would you say that's included or could be?
Thank you, Councillor Wright Mason, for that point. I think communications are really, really important. Certainly, I think it should be included in the scope, and I really appreciate you raising that. I think it's probably best suited to be addressed in Section 3, which is issues and concerns with the current mechanism, looking at actually sort of whether or not residents are able to well, they're able to sort of find out what's going on in their communities, etc. And obviously, that's a concern of which I'm certainly hearing from you. Part of the evidence of which we will gain from a whole host of different people are from local residents themselves and community organisations, about making sure actually, you know, we're not just focused on the local authorities and sort of, you know, how it works on an authority level and a governance level, but equally as well what the community impact is, because ultimately, you know, development impacts communities, and Section 106 funding is there in order to mitigate the impact on those communities. So it's really important that we get that community engagement from local residents, parish councils, and different other organisations.
Thank you. Says legal advisor. Is that you?
So Appendix A actually has areas of investigation and some questions that we've raised. Councillors can add further to this. So the list is not extensive. So if there's things that you feel that you know, would help with the investigation, that would be beneficial if you could raise them now or offline.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. I think we were hoping that was going to happen. I think looking at the time this evening, I think we're limited in what we're probably going to get. So potentially, if a member was minded to move an additional recommendation on top of this, so we could still go to review and comment as you've done on the draft scoping document as Appendix A, note the task and finish group protocol at Appendix B, endorse the principles and review of the review and approves consultation with group leaders. We can do all that. And then I would add on to the end of 2.3, subject to recommendation 2.4, adding 2.4, delegates authority to the scrutiny officer in consultation with the chair of the overview and scrutiny committee to update and finalise the scoping document for the task and finish group on Section 106 contributions. Hopefully somebody would be willing to.
I think that sounds fine and sensible. Yeah. Does anyone want to second that? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. I'll happy to propose. Would I just be able to sort of mention something that I did omit to mention earlier? Just on timeframes, I think obviously we're currently. Yeah, sorry. Do you want to ask your question? Then I'll. So just on timeframes, obviously this is a big piece of work that is going to be undertaken by members and by the council. Certainly for the first task and finish group that we've done for an awful long time, I think sort of we've also got to factor in sort of we're all going to be learning during this process. But in an ideal world, the task and finish group completes and publishes its report so that it's able then to inform the North Hertfordshire local plan review and the policies of which are going to be contained within that, so that we're able to have the most up-to-date information and ensure that when that review is completed, that, you know, residents are going to be able to have the maximum benefit from Section 106 funding or developer contribution, shall we say.
I think that sounds sensible. I was going to ask whether we should have some kind of interim report as well. I don't know how long we're planning to take with this, because it says TBC in the report. And I guess it would depend also on resourcing the actual group as well, which we still need to do. Yeah, I think it would be good to have some sort of interim updates as we sort of go through. Alternatively, you know, make the scope more direct to the phase one and then expand that out. Do you know, yeah, you can come back on that. I've got one more point as well.
Yeah, no, I think certainly with the time frame and sort of reporting back to the committee, it's really important that sort of all members are, of course, aware of what's going on. And certainly, yeah, I would be looking to report back and provide an interim update and report and
Yeah.
answer any questions members have.
Yeah, as part of that delegated process, we can work out the detail of that.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I was going to ask about was on the potential witnesses and contributors. Other local authorities that either have the same system as us or possibly an alternative mechanism that's discussed and their experiences, I think would be a useful input to this as well. I'm not aware of any to suggest any, but I'm sure other people more informed about this will be. I guess that's sort of the point of the Task and Finish group to one extent. Okay. Councillor Allen, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to come in on this, Chair, to ask, while I think it's a very, very good idea, could we ensure that in the wording we make sure that the local plan reviews can't be held up if this hasn't been completed?
I think that's reasonable, yeah. Yeah, please do.
So just looking here, I think you raised a very, very good point, Councillor Allen. I think it's important that, particularly with the changes to the planning system which are proposed, we need to be obviously reviewing the local plan and getting that review underway as soon as possible. Obviously, we want it to try and inform that local plan review, but I don't think at this moment, having had a look at it, there is anything within the scoping document of which would lend itself to that.
Okay, any further questions? No. Okay. In which case we'll move to the recommendations, which James has already read out. So I'm going to not labour that. I'm happy to propose those, and yeah, Councillor Munster can second. Thank you. Is there any debate on that? No. I need to say thank you again for your efforts in doing this. I am slightly concerned that the scope might be quite large depending on how we're trying to deliver it, but I think we can work that out as we go along. But no, so I'm keen that we start to use this mechanism again and have a sort of member-initiated approach to some of these things. So thank you for filling that void. Okay, let's go to the vote.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Okay, not much left now. Right, item 14 is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee work programme. Stephen Mann to present.
Thank you, Chair. The work programme has been compiled following conversations with the Chair and Vice Chair, including the annual report, items for the full plan, and possible items for scrutiny, and is at Appendix A. Thank you for providing your suggestions for the Hertfordshire Crime and Disorders update. I can confirm that North Herts Police will be in attendance in January 2025, and they will provide an update on youth engagement and youth crime prevention. Any suggested topics for the work programme can be raised at this meeting by emailing the Scrutiny mailbox or by raising them to the Chair or Vice Chair. Or come see me. The LGA peer review, all actions have been included in Appendix 6 of the report. Most of them have now been completed and only 2 items remain open. That's all. Any questions?
Yeah, those are obviously the actions from the previous peer review of Overview and Scrutiny and FAR, which was conducted a couple of years ago. I'm looking at Councillor Dennis to help me out, but I'm not sure why. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or suggestions on the work programme? Councillor Wright Mason.
Happy to obviously touch on in more detail offline, but is there maybe something around transport, getting someone in to talk about that? I don't know how. Well,
yeah, so I think,
is it on there?
yeah,
Sorry.
so we've got for February, we've got planning and transport
Yeah.
portfolio update, which would take a similar form to the one that we had this evening on enterprise. If the committee is satisfied that that was a useful exercise, I think we should keep that on the plan.
Fair enough. No, I meant more possibly an outside rather than internal is what I meant to say. But yeah, I appreciate it if transport's already covered.
Okay. Councillor Munter?
Just 2 quick points. With respect to the health matters in the NHS, might it be sort of an idea to maybe focus on sort of primary care provision, sort of, GP appointments. I know that's sort of an issue of which many people across the district are sort of really concerned about. So it might be a good idea to focus on that. And obviously then other members can come in and potentially ask questions as well, obviously with your permission, Chair. And then sort of focusing on the LGA Peer Challenge report, I think that's going to be published in February. So I'm not sure whether or not we're going to be focusing on trying to get it done in this civic year or the next.
Yeah. So on those points, thank you for those points. On the health matters, I was actually going to propose that we look at dentistry specifically on the basis that it was adopted, or the Integrated Care Boards took that over in April 2023, so kind of fairly recently. It also unusually, the Herts and West Essex ICB covers the whole district for dentistry commissioning, despite Royston being in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough one elsewhere. So I think that, and shortage of appointments, restrictions from the contract, child tooth decay, etc., etc. There's lots of interesting points on that. So that's what I was going to propose, but I'd like people to feedback on that. Your second point, the corporate peer challenge, I think we might be able to do it in March if it's published in February, but I don't know. I'd need to take guidance on that from the officers at the time. I mean, if it's published early, we might be able to do it in February, but I might be pushing it. Okay, does anyone have any more questions or comments on this? I'd also just be interested in thoughts on the enterprise portfolio update that we had earlier, not necessarily now, but afterwards, to see if you thought it was worthwhile as a model. Okay, Councillor Winchester. Councillor Winchester? Is it not going red? It's showing us live on here.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Sorry. I'm often reminded that social care is the other half of the picture with healthcare, and it's all very well talking about GPs and dentists, but they've got to have social care to refer to as well. Can we maybe schedule that later in the programme, please? And we can consider a suitable topic.
I think we can consider it, yeah. It's see, it's a county responsibility primarily, isn't it? But yeah, I think we can consider it and take some advice on that. Okay. Fine. Any other questions? No. Okay, cool. The recommendations then, the committee prioritises topics for inclusion in the work programme attached to Appendix A, and where appropriate determines the high level form and timing of scrutiny input. The committee, having considered the most recent iteration of the forward plan as attached to Appendix B, suggests a list of items to be considered at its meetings in the coming civic year, and that the corporate peer challenge action plan as attached to Appendix C be considered. I'll propose. Seconder, Councillor Tyson. Any debates? No. No. Okay. Then let's vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. And we have one more item on the agenda, which is the decisions and monitoring tracker. Apparently, I thought that was in the same item, but no. Okay, the decisions and monitoring tracker. Jeevan Mann.
The referrals and recommendations and the decision and monitor tracker were made to Cabinet by the Chair of ONS, Councillor Barnes, on 9th September 2024. Following the ONS meeting on 3rd September 2024, Councillor Barnes outlined the main discussion points raised and the reasons for the referrals and recommendations. All items were considered and recommendations noted by Cabinet. These will now be marked as complete. Going forward, we will be reporting on items that were referred to Cabinet which require monitoring. These are currently 3 items on the monitoring tracker, which I will work with Councillor, the Chair and the Vice Chair to identify suitable review times for, and will provide monitoring information regarding these at future meetings as appropriate. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No, okay, good. Then I recommend that the contents of the decision and monitoring tracker be noted. Councillor Dennis is happily seconding. Sorry. Very good. Let's vote. Oh no, wait. Debate. No debate. Let's vote. Okay.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. So we'll close the meeting. The next meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee is on Tuesday, the 7th of January 2025. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Yeah. Happy Christmas and New Year and all that.